I should have known something was wrong when my parents arrived at Stanford's graduation ceremony carrying a manila folder instead of flowers. Standing there in my cap and gown clutching my computer science degree, I watched Dad's face twist with determination while Mom fidgeted nervously beside him. "Charity, we need to talk right now," Dad announced, pulling legal documents from the folder. "Sign these papers transferring your tech patents to Madison. She needs a future more than you do." When I refused, his face turned crimson with rage. He grabbed my diploma and ripped it clean in half, the tear echoing across the graduation lawn as my classmates gasped in horror. The confrontation exploded right there on the university grounds, with hundreds of other families witnessing our private nightmare become public humiliation. Madison stepped forward from behind our parents, her pregnant belly prominent beneath a flowing dress, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pleaded with me to understand her desperation. "I'm unemployed, Charity, and the baby's coming in 4 months." She sobbed, pressing her hands against her stomach. "You're the smart one, you'll always land on your feet. I need those patents to secure my child's future." Mom nodded vigorously, her voice cracking with emotion. "Your sister has struggled her whole life while everything came easy to you. Academic scholarships, research, grants, job offers. Madison needs this opportunity more than you ever will." I stared at them in disbelief, my mind racing to process this betrayal. "These are my innovations, my years of work. You can't just give them away because Madison made poor life choices." Dad's expression hardened as he stepped closer, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "We sacrificed everything for your education, young lady. The least you can do is help your sister when she needs it most." That's when Madison's husband, Jake, emerged from the crowd, his expensive suit and confident swagger immediately setting off alarm bells in my head. "Look, Charity, this doesn't have to be complicated. Madison deserves her share of the family's success. Your patents could set us all up for life." I felt my stomach drop as the pieces began falling into place. "How do you even know about my patents, Jake? I never told anyone outside my research team about the specific details." Madison's face flushed red as she exchanged a guilty glance with her husband. "Well, we might have done some research about your projects. Jake has connections in the tech industry, and we discovered how valuable your work could be." "Research," I demanded, my voice rising despite the public setting. "You mean you've been investigating my private academic work behind my back?" Aunt Linda, who had traveled from Oregon for my graduation, stepped forward with confusion written across her face. "Wait a minute, Robert." She addressed my father. "Didn't you tell me last Christmas that you'd already spent Charity's college fund on Madison's wedding and that failed boutique business?" The color drained from Dad's face as family members began murmuring among themselves. Uncle Frank nodded grimly. "That's right, Linda. Robert borrowed $25,000 from me 2 years ago for Madison's business venture that went nowhere. Said he'd pay me back when Charity started earning her big tech salary." My world tilted as the truth crashed over me. They had been planning this for months, possibly years. Every family dinner conversation about my research, every seemingly innocent question about my patent applications had been intelligence gathering for this moment. "You spent my college fund," I whispered, feeling betrayed on a level I had never imagined possible. "The money Grandma left specifically for my education." Mom's composure finally cracked. "Madison needed help starting her married life, and we knew you'd get scholarships anyway. You're so brilliant, we figured you wouldn't need the money like she would." The favoritism that had shaped my entire childhood suddenly came into sharp focus. Madison's mistakes had always been excused while my achievements were expected. Her failures required family bailouts while my successes were taken for granted. "Professor Martinez," my thesis advisor approached our group with concern etched on his face. "Charity, is everything all right? The graduation reception is starting and several tech recruiters specifically asked to meet with you." Jake's eyes lit up with opportunity. "Actually, Professor, we were just discussing Charity's future plans. Her family thinks it might be better if she focused on collaborative projects rather than individual patent ownership." I felt a surge of protective anger. These people were trying to manipulate not just me, but everyone around me. Professor Martinez, my family is trying to pressure me into signing away my intellectual property rights. They have no legal claim to my work. Dad's face contorted with rage at my public defiance. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. Your sister is pregnant and desperate, and you're worried about paperwork. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. They were using Madison's pregnancy, family loyalty, and public pressure to coerce me into surrendering years of innovative research. The patents represented breakthrough algorithms for renewable energy optimization, mobile security protocols, and artificial intelligence-assisted medical diagnostics. These weren't just valuable intellectual property, they were potentially life-changing innovations. As graduation families continued walking past our heated argument, I realized this confrontation had been carefully orchestrated. The timing, the public setting, the emotional manipulation, even Jake's presence with his tech industry knowledge. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment family discussion. This was a coordinated campaign to defraud me of my life's work. I drove back to my apartment in Palo Alto with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, the torn pieces of my diploma scattered across the passenger seat like confetti from the worst celebration imaginable. My mind kept replaying the graduation confrontation, trying to understand how my own family had transformed into strangers, willing to destroy me for money. When I climbed the stairs to my second-floor unit, something felt wrong immediately. The deadbolt was unlocked, though I distinctly remembered securing it before leaving for graduation. My key turned too easily in the handle, and the door swung open to reveal my worst nightmare. Madison sat at my kitchen table with file folders spread everywhere, while Jake hunched over my laptop computer, frantically photographing documents with his smartphone. My private research files, patent applications, and technical diagrams covered every surface of my small dining area. "What the hell are you doing in my apartment?" I demanded, slamming the door behind me hard enough to rattle the windows. Madison jumped up from her chair, her face flushing guilty crimson. "Charity, you're back early. We were just trying to understand the scope of your work so we could help you make better decisions about your future." "Help me." I laughed bitterly, surveying the violation of my privacy. "By breaking into my home and stealing my research, how did you even get inside?" Jake continued photographing documents without looking up, his fingers flying across his phone screen. "Madison had a spare key made months ago when she was helping you move furniture. We're not stealing anything, just documenting what already belongs to the family." I lunged forward and slammed my laptop shut, nearly catching Jake's fingers in the process. "Nothing here belongs to the family. These are my innovations created during my graduate research using my own intellectual labor." Madison started crying again, her pregnancy hormones amplifying every emotion. "You don't understand the pressure we're under, Charity. Jake's company is downsizing and we can't afford the baby expenses on my part-time retail salary. We discovered your patents could be worth millions, enough to secure our entire family's future. How exactly did you discover that information?" I demanded, gathering my scattered papers and clutching them protectively against my chest. "These technical specifications aren't exactly casual reading material." Jake finally looked up from his phone with a smugness that made my skin crawl. "I work in venture capital, Charity. Evaluating emerging technology is literally my job. When Madison mentioned your academic achievements, I did some research and realized your innovations have serious commercial potential." The pieces of their deception continued falling into place with sickening clarity. "So you've been monitoring my research progress and calculating its market value while pretending to be supportive family members. We prefer to think of it as looking out for everyone's best interests," Jake replied smoothly, tucking his phone into his jacket pocket. "Your work could benefit the entire family instead of just enriching one person." I felt violated in ways I had never experienced before. My own sister had been spying on me, documenting my private research, and planning to steal the fruits of my intellectual labor. The betrayal cut deeper than any romantic heartbreak or friendship disappointment I had ever endured. Madison, I need you both to leave my apartment immediately, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. Take nothing with you and return that spare key you made without my permission. Charity, please listen to reason, Madison pleaded, reaching for my arm. The baby will need college funds, medical expenses, all kinds of support. Your patents could provide security for the next generation. I jerked away from her touch. Your financial planning failures are not my responsibility to solve. You made choices that led to this situation, and now you want to steal my work to fix your problems. Jake stood up slowly, his demeanor shifting from casual smugness to barely concealed threat. Actually, Charity, you might want to reconsider your position. Madison and I have been in contact with some tech companies that are very interested in your innovations. They're prepared to make substantial offers with or without your cooperation. My blood turned to ice as the implications hit me. Are you threatening to sell my intellectual property without my consent? That's patent fraud, Jake. It's a federal crime. Is it fraud if your family members are acting in your best interests? He countered with a lawyer's precision. Especially when you're clearly not equipped to handle negotiations with major corporations. Madison nodded enthusiastically, apparently oblivious to her husband's criminal suggestions. See, Charity Jake knows how to handle business deals. You should trust his expertise instead of being so stubborn about keeping everything for yourself. I realized that Madison wasn't just complicit in this scheme. She was genuinely convinced that stealing my work was somehow morally justified. The pregnancy, the financial pressure, and Jake's manipulation had warped her perspective until she believed fraud was acceptable if it benefited her family. Both of you need to understand something very clearly, I said, moving toward my apartment door and opening it wide. My patents are legally protected intellectual property. Any attempt to steal, sell, or transfer them without my explicit written consent will result in criminal charges and federal prosecution. Jake smiled coldly as he walked past me toward the door. You might be surprised how complicated patent law can become, especially when family relationships are involved. I'd suggest consulting with a lawyer before making any threats you can't back up. Madison lingered at the threshold, her eyes pleading for understanding. Charity, we're not your enemies. We're trying to help you see the bigger picture. Individual success means nothing if your family suffers. Individual success, I repeated incredulously. Madison, I've spent the last 3 years working 18-hour days to develop these innovations. I've sacrificed social relationships, sleep, and personal happiness to create something meaningful. This isn't individual success, it's the result of extraordinary personal sacrifice. She shook her head sadly. You've always been selfish, Charity. Even as kids, you never wanted to share your toys or achievements. Some things never change. The accusation stung because it revealed how completely she had rewritten our childhood history to justify her current behavior. Madison had always been the favored child who received extra attention, special allowances, and constant support for her various endeavors. Now she was casting herself as the victim of my supposed selfishness. After they left, I double-locked my door and immediately began photographing every document they had accessed. The scope of their invasion was breathtaking. They had rifled through my personal files, research notes, patent applications, technical diagrams, and even my private correspondence with professors and potential employers. I discovered that Jake had downloaded files from my computer and photographed my most sensitive technical specifications. They now possessed enough information about my innovations to potentially file competing patent applications or sell my ideas to corporate competitors. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own family had orchestrated a sophisticated intellectual property theft operation, using emotional manipulation and family access to steal my life's work. The graduation ambush hadn't been an impulsive demand for sharing. It had been the culmination of months of planning, surveillance, and preparation for fraud. I sat on my couch surrounded by scattered papers, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. My patents covered breakthrough algorithms for renewable energy optimization that could revolutionize solar panel efficiency. My mobile security protocols addressed critical vulnerabilities in smartphone privacy protection. My artificial intelligence-assisted medical diagnostic system could help doctors identify diseases earlier and more accurately than current technology allowed. These innovations represented not just potential wealth, but genuine contributions to human welfare and technological progress. Madison and Jake wanted to steal them for personal financial gain, apparently without any consideration of the broader implications or the years of work they represented. As I organized my violated files, I began planning my counterattack. If my family wanted to play hardball with my intellectual property, they were about to discover that I was far better equipped for that battle than they had imagined. The next morning, I called in sick to my research assistant position and drove straight to downtown San Francisco to meet with Sarah Chen, the intellectual property attorney who had helped me file my original patent applications. Her office occupied the 32nd floor of a gleaming high-rise with panoramic views of the Bay Area that normally would have impressed me. Today, I barely noticed the scenery. Sarah listened to my account of the graduation confrontation and apartment invasion, with growing alarm taking detailed notes on her legal pad, while occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates and specific actions. "Charity, this situation is more serious than family drama," she said when I finished my story. "What you're describing sounds like organized patent theft with possible corporate backing." She pulled up several files on her computer screen and frowned at what she discovered. "I need to show you something disturbing. 3 competing patent applications have been filed in the last 2 months covering technology, suspiciously similar to your innovations." My heart sank as she displayed the application summaries. The renewable energy algorithms, mobile security protocols, and medical diagnostic systems were all represented, though, with slightly different technical language and implementation details. "How is this possible?" I asked, studying the filing dates. "I haven't shared my complete technical specifications with anyone outside my research team." Sarah's expression grew more troubled as she cross-referenced additional databases. The applications were filed by shell companies with addresses that trace back to a venture capital firm called Pinnacle Innovation Partners. Does that name mean anything to you? I felt the blood drain from my face. Jake, my brother-in-law, mentioned working in venture capital. Could this be his company? "Let me research that connection." Sarah said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Within minutes, she had pulled up Jake's professional profile and employment history. Here we go. Jake Morrison, Senior Associate at Pinnacle Innovation Partners, specializing in emerging technology acquisitions and patent portfolio development. The conspiracy suddenly expanded far beyond family greed. Jake hadn't just been evaluating my work for personal gain. He'd been conducting corporate espionage using his marriage to Madison to access my research and steal my innovations for his employer. "Sarah, what are my legal options here?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of the fraud. "Can we stop these competing applications?" She pulled up additional legal databases and reviewed case precedents for similar situations. "We can file intellectual property theft claims and request investigations into the suspicious timing and technical similarities. However, patent disputes can take months or years to resolve, especially when corporate legal teams are involved." "What about the family angle?" I pressed. "Madison and Jake violated my privacy and stole my research documents. Surely that's prosecutable." Sarah nodded grimly. "Absolutely. We're talking about potential federal crimes including patent fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violations of computer privacy laws. The fact that they accessed your personal files and computer without permission adds criminal dimensions to the civil patent disputes." She continued researching while I sat in stunned silence, trying to process how my graduation celebration had revealed a criminal conspiracy involving my own family members and a major venture capital firm. "Charity, there's something else you need to know," Sarah said after reviewing more files. Pinnacle Innovation Partners has a history of questionable patent acquisitions. They've been involved in at least 6 other cases where recent graduates accuse them of stealing university research through various deceptive practices. So this isn't their first time targeting young inventors. I asked, feeling sick to my stomach. Definitely not. They appear to specialize in identifying promising innovations from graduate students and recent graduates, then using various pressure tactics to acquire the patents at below market value or outright steal the technology. Sarah printed out several case studies and handed them to me. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Pinnacle would identify valuable research through industry connections, academic contacts, or family relationships. They would then apply pressure through financial offers, legal threats, or personal manipulation to acquire the patents for far less than their actual worth. In most previous cases, the young inventors eventually settled rather than fight extended legal battles, Sarah explained. Pinnacle banks on the fact that recent graduates typically lack the resources for prolonged litigation against a well-funded corporation. I studied the case files with growing anger. These weren't isolated incidents of corporate opportunism. This was a systematic pattern of intellectual property theft targeting vulnerable young innovators who had invested years developing breakthrough technologies. What makes my situation different from these previous cases? I asked. Sarah smiled for the first time during our meeting. Several factors work in your favor. First, you documented the theft meticulously, including the family members' admission of their intentions. Second, your patents are extremely valuable, making the potential damages substantial enough to justify major litigation. Third, you have clear evidence of premeditation and conspiracy. She pulled up financial databases and showed me preliminary patent valuations. Charity, based on similar innovations and current market demand, your complete patent portfolio could be worth anywhere from $60 to $90 million in licensing agreements and acquisition offers. The number hit me like a physical blow. I had known my work was valuable, but seeing the actual figures made the scope of the attempted theft even more staggering. That's why Pinnacle is so aggressive about acquiring your patents, Sarah continued. Even if they pay you $5 or $10 million, they stand to profit enormously from licensing your innovations to major tech companies. So Jake and Madison were planning to steal intellectual property worth potentially $90 million. I asked, still struggling to comprehend the magnitude. It appears that way. And based on the legal documents you described them carrying at graduation, they were hoping to pressure you into signing over your rights voluntarily, which would have made their theft technically legal. Sarah leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. Charity, you have a choice to make. You can pursue criminal charges against your family members and file major litigation against Pinnacle Innovation Partners. But that means potentially destroying relationships and engaging in years of legal warfare. Or, I prompted, or you can try to negotiate settlements and minimize the family damage while still protecting your intellectual property rights. The choice depends on how important justice is to you versus preserving family relationships. I thought about Madison's tears, my parents' financial desperation, and Jake's smug confidence that I wouldn't fight back. Then I thought about the other young inventors who had been victimized by this same corporate predator, and the innovations that could benefit society if they weren't buried in corporate patent portfolios. Sarah, I want to fight, not just for my own patents, but to expose this pattern of theft and protect other inventors from being victimized. She nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. We'll start by filing injunctions to prevent any further use of your stolen research, then build comprehensive cases for both criminal prosecution and civil damages. What should I expect in terms of retaliation? I asked. Jake seemed confident that they could pressure me into compliance. Sarah's expression grew serious. Corporate intellectual property theft often involves intimidation tactics designed to discourage legal action. You should expect threats, pressure from family members, and possibly attempts to discredit your work or character. So this is going to get worse before it gets better. Almost certainly. But Charity, you have something most of their previous victims lacked. Your work is genuinely revolutionary, your documentation is thorough, and your resolve seems strong. Those advantages could make the difference between justice and another corporate theft going unpunished. As I left Sarah's office with copies of legal filings and strategic recommendations, I realized that my family's graduation ambush had been just the opening move in what would become a much larger battle. The question was whether I had the strength to see it through to the end. I woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, all received between 6 and 7 a.m., while my phone was on silent mode. The message previews visible on my lock screen made my stomach clench with dread. Call me immediately, from Dad. Major development with your patents, from Jake. Emergency family meeting today, from Mom. You need to see this offer, from Madison. I poured myself coffee and opened the first email in my inbox, which contained a formal acquisition proposal from Megatech Industries, with a letterhead featuring their distinctive blue logo and corporate headquarters address in Seattle. The opening paragraph made my hands tremble as I read. Dear Ms. Charity Williams, Megatech Industries is prepared to offer $22 million for the complete acquisition of your renewable energy optimization algorithms, mobile security protocols, and artificial intelligence medical diagnostic patents, along with all associated intellectual property rights and future development potential. $22 million. The number seemed surreal, even though Sarah had warned me that my patents were worth much more. Seeing an actual corporate offer made the value of my work suddenly tangible in a way that abstract valuations hadn't achieved. The acquisition terms were detailed and professional, covering licensing agreements, development timelines, and integration with Megatech's existing technology platforms. Everything appeared legitimate until I reached the final paragraph, which mentioned that Megatech had been contacted by family representatives acting on your behalf to facilitate these negotiations. My phone rang immediately as I finished reading the offer. Madison's name appeared on the caller ID, and I reluctantly answered on the fourth ring. Charity, isn't this incredible? She gushed without any greeting. $22 million. We're going to be rich beyond our wildest dreams. Jake says we should accept the offer immediately before they change their minds. I repeated sharply. Madison, this offer is addressed to me personally. There's no we involved in my patent ownership. Don't be ridiculous, she replied, her voice taking on the whining tone I remembered from childhood arguments. I contacted Megatech months ago to let them know about your innovations. This offer exists because of my initiative and Jake's industry connections. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. You contacted them months ago, Madison. You've been shopping my research to corporations behind my back. I prefer to think of it as helping my brilliant sister reach her full potential, she said defensively. You're terrible at business negotiations, Charity. You would have undersold your work or gotten taken advantage of by corporate sharks. I couldn't believe the audacity of her rationalization. She had violated my privacy, stolen my research, and conducted unauthorized negotiations with my intellectual property, then presented herself as my helpful advocate. Madison, what you did is called patent fraud. It's a federal crime punishable by massive fines and prison time. Oh, please, she laughed dismissively. We're family. I was looking out for your interests while you were buried in your academic bubble. Jake says family members can represent each other in business dealings. My doorbell rang insistently, followed by heavy knocking. Through the peephole, I could see my parents standing on the porch with Jake hovering behind them, all three looking agitated and determined. I have to go, Madison. Don't contact any more companies about my work. Wait, Charity, Jake negotiated a finder's fee arrangement with Megatech. Since I initiated contact and facilitated the deal, we're entitled to 10% of the acquisition price. That's $2.2 million for our family's contribution. I hung up on her and reluctantly opened the front door. Dad pushed past me without invitation, his face flushed with excitement and barely contained greed. Charity, we need to discuss this Megatech offer immediately, he announced, settling himself on my couch like he owned the place. $22 million could solve all our family's financial problems and set everyone up for life. Mom perched nervously on the edge of my reclining chair, wringing her hands while Jake stationed himself near the kitchen with his phone out, apparently ready to document our conversation. "This isn't a family decision, Dad," I said, firmly remaining standing near the door. "The offer is for my patents, which I own individually." "Don't be naive, Charity," Jake interjected smoothly. "Family wealth benefits everyone. Your parents sacrificed to support your education. Madison provided the industry connections that generated this offer, and I contributed the business expertise to structure the negotiations properly." "What negotiations?" I demanded. "I never authorized anyone to represent me in discussions with Megatech or any other corporation." Dad waved dismissively. "Details, details. The important thing is securing this incredible opportunity before it disappears. Jake says corporate offers like this are time-sensitive and could be withdrawn if we delay too long." The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and coordination. They had conducted unauthorized negotiations, claimed credit for generating the offer, demanded substantial finder's fees, and were now pressuring me to accept terms I had no part in creating. "I want to understand something very clearly," I said, looking directly at Jake. "How exactly did you facilitate contact with Megatech? I never told anyone outside my research team about the specific technical details of my innovations." Jake's confident expression faltered slightly. "Madison mentioned your academic achievements during family conversations. I recognized the commercial potential and reached out to appropriate industry contacts to explore opportunities." "Industry contacts," I repeated slowly. "Jake, do you work for companies that compete with Megatech or do business with them?" "I work for Pinnacle Innovation Partners," he said carefully. "We occasionally collaborate with various tech companies on patent acquisition and development projects." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. Jake worked for the same venture capital firm that had filed competing patent applications using my stolen research. He had been conducting corporate espionage while masquerading as family support. "Mom, Dad." "Oh," I said, turning to address my parents directly. "Jake's company has filed patent applications stealing my innovations. The Megatech offer isn't a legitimate business opportunity. It's part of a criminal conspiracy to defraud me of my intellectual property." Dad scoffed dismissively. "Charity, you're being paranoid and ungrateful. Jake is trying to help our family benefit from your talents instead of letting you waste opportunities through inexperience." "Have you seen the competing patent applications?" I asked. "Do you understand that Jake's employer is trying to steal my work and sell it to the highest bidder?" Mom looked confused and frightened. "I don't understand all these legal complications. I just know that Madison is pregnant and struggling, and $22 million could help everyone in the family." Jake stepped forward with renewed confidence. "Charity, you're overcomplicating a straightforward business opportunity. Megatech is offering excellent terms for your innovations. My involvement simply ensured that you received appropriate market value instead of being exploited by corporate negotiators." "Appropriate market value," I laughed bitterly. "Jake, my patent attorney, estimates my complete portfolio is worth $60 to $90 million in licensing agreements. Your Megatech offer represents a fraction of the actual value." The room fell silent as the financial implications sank in. Dad's face went pale as he realized the scope of the money involved. Mom's hands flew to her mouth in shock. $60 to $90 million, Dad whispered. "Charity, are you certain about those numbers?" Jake quickly interjected before I could respond. "Patent attorneys always inflate valuations to justify their fees. $22 million is an excellent offer for unproven technology from a recent graduate." "Unproven," I snapped. "Jake, my renewable energy algorithms have already been tested by 3 major solar manufacturers. My security protocols are being evaluated by smartphone companies. My medical diagnostic system has shown 96% accuracy in clinical trials. This technology isn't theoretical, it's ready for commercial implementation." Dad looked back and forth between Jake and me, clearly trying to process the conflicting information. So you're saying we might be leaving $60 or $70 million on the table by accepting this offer? We're not leaving anything on the table, I corrected firmly. I own these patents individually. Any decisions about licensing or acquisition are mine alone to make. Jake's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating corporate operative beneath the helpful family member facade. Actually, Charity, you might want to consider the legal implications of rejecting this offer. Megatech has substantial resources and experienced legal teams. Fighting them could cost you more than accepting their terms. The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. Accept the lowball offer or face corporate retaliation through protracted legal warfare. Is that a threat, Jake? I asked evenly. It's realistic business advice, he replied coldly. Young inventors who overestimate their negotiating position often end up with nothing when they're too stubborn to accept reasonable offers. I realized that this entire meeting had been orchestrated to pressure me into accepting terms that would enrich Jake's company while leaving me with a fraction of my innovation's actual worth. The family relationships, the financial pressure, even Madison's pregnancy were all being weaponized to coerce my compliance. I need everyone to leave my apartment immediately, I announced, moving to open the front door. Any future communication about my patents needs to go through my attorney. Dad stood up reluctantly, his face showing confusion and disappointment. Charity, we're trying to help you make smart financial decisions. Don't let pride cost you this incredible opportunity. This isn't about pride, Dad. It's about preventing the theft of my life's work by criminals who are manipulating our family relationships to commit fraud. As they filed out, Jake paused at the threshold and looked back with cold calculation in his eyes. Charity, you should understand that rejecting legitimate business offers can have consequences. I'd hate to see you end up like other inventors who thought they were smarter than the market. After I locked the door behind them, I sat down with the Megatech offer and began analyzing every detail with new understanding. The acquisition terms weren't just unfavorable. They were specifically structured to transfer maximum value to Megatech while leaving me with minimal ongoing rights or royalties. I called Sarah Chen immediately and read her the complete offer over the phone. Her response confirmed my worst suspicions. Charity, this offer is deliberately structured to undervalue your patents while eliminating your future earning potential. The $22 million looks impressive, but it represents maybe 25% of your innovation's actual worth. So Jake was right that it's better than nothing, I asked. Only if nothing were your alternative, Sarah replied grimly. But you have multiple options, including much more lucrative licensing agreements that would preserve your ongoing rights and royalties. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my family's graduation ambush had been just the opening move in a sophisticated corporate theft operation. The real question was whether I had the courage to fight back against forces that were far more powerful and ruthless than I had ever imagined. I spent the next 3 days researching Megatech Industries and Pinnacle Innovation Partners, diving deep into corporate filings, executive profiles, and public records that painted a disturbing picture of systematic patent manipulation. What I discovered made my family's betrayal seem like amateur hour compared to the sophisticated criminal enterprise behind it. Megatech's acquisition history revealed a pattern of purchasing patents from young inventors at dramatically below market prices, then licensing the same technology to competitors for exponentially higher fees. Their renewable energy division alone had acquired 47 patents from recent graduates over the past 5 years, paying an average of $15 million per portfolio, while generating licensing revenues exceeding $200 million annually. But the connection to Pinnacle Innovation Partners was even more sinister. Corporate filings showed that Jake's venture capital firm operated as a front company for Megatech's patent acquisition operations, identifying promising innovations through university partnerships, family connections, and industry contacts before orchestrating pressure campaigns to force below-market sales. I printed out financial records showing that Pinnacle had received over $30 million in consulting fees from Megatech over the past 3 years, essentially payment for delivering stolen or undervalued intellectual property. Jake wasn't just facilitating individual patent thefts, he was operating a systematic pipeline, feeding innovations from vulnerable inventors to corporate predators. The most disturbing discovery came when I cross-referenced patent filing dates with acquisition offers. In every case, Megatech's lowball offers arrived within days of competing applications, filed by Pinnacle's shell companies, creating artificial urgency and legal threats designed to pressure inventors into accepting inadequate terms rather than fighting protracted patent disputes. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Charity, Jake says Megatech is getting impatient about your decision. They might withdraw the offer if you don't respond by Friday." The artificial deadline confirmed that I was receiving the full corporate pressure treatment. I forwarded Madison's message to Sarah Chen along with my research findings about the Megatech Pinnacle connection. Her response came back within an hour. "Charity, what you've uncovered could be grounds for federal racketeering charges. This isn't just patent theft, it's organized corporate crime." I called Sarah immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed her direct number. "Sarah, how is this legal? How can they operate this kind of systematic fraud without getting prosecuted?" "The beauty of their system is plausible deniability," she explained. Megatech claims they're making legitimate acquisition offers based on market evaluations. Pinnacle claims they're filing patent applications for legitimate research. The family pressure appears to be personal disputes rather than corporate coercion. "But we have evidence of the coordination," I protested. "Jake works for Pinnacle, they filed competing applications using my stolen research, and Megatech's offer came immediately after the family pressure campaign." "Exactly. Which means you're in a unique position to expose the entire operation. Most previous victims didn't understand the corporate connections or have evidence of the coordination between companies." Sarah explained that federal prosecutors had been investigating similar patent manipulation schemes, but lacked sufficient evidence to prove criminal conspiracy. My case could provide the missing links needed to bring down the entire network. "What would that involve?" I asked, feeling both excited and terrified by the implications. "Full cooperation with federal investigators, detailed documentation of every interaction with family members and corporate representatives, and willingness to testify in criminal proceedings against everyone involved." The prospect of sending my own family members to federal prison made my stomach churn, even knowing they had betrayed me for corporate profit. "Sarah, what about Madison and my parents? Are they facing serious criminal charges?" "That depends on how much they knew about the corporate conspiracy. If they were unwitting pawns being manipulated by Jake, prosecutors might offer immunity in exchange for cooperation. If they were knowing participants in patent fraud, they could face substantial prison sentences." I realized I needed to understand exactly how deep my family's involvement went before deciding how far to pursue criminal charges. The thought of Madison's baby being born while she served time in federal prison was almost unbearable regardless of her role in the theft attempt. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in Fremont for what I knew would be a confrontational family meeting. The modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home where I had grown up looked smaller and more worn than I remembered, with peeling paint on the garage door and an overgrown front yard that spoke of financial neglect. Madison's car was parked in the driveway next to Jake's BMW, confirming that the entire family would be present for whatever pressure campaign they had planned. I steeled myself for emotional manipulation and walked up to the front door where I had received countless hugs and birthday celebrations before corporate greed poisoned everything. Mom answered my knock with red-rimmed eyes and a wan smile. "Charity, sweetheart, I'm so glad you came. We need to work this out as a family." The living room felt cramped with all 5 adults gathered around the coffee table, which was covered with printed emails, legal documents, and financial statements. Jake had clearly prepared extensively for this meeting, with multiple folders organized by topic and a laptop computer open to what appeared to be corporate presentations. "Charity, Dad began without preamble. We've been doing more research about your patent situation, and we think you're making a serious mistake by rejecting the Megatech offer. Jake opened his laptop and projected financial charts onto the television screen, displaying patent valuation models and market analysis graphs. Based on comparable technology sales and current market conditions, $22 million represents excellent value for unproven innovations from an unestablished inventor. Unestablished, I repeated incredulously. Jake, I graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with 3 years of graduate research and peer-reviewed publications. How exactly am I unestablished? Academic credentials don't translate directly to commercial success, he replied smoothly. Corporate buyers evaluate inventors based on track records of successful product launches and market penetration, not university achievements. Madison nodded enthusiastically, apparently convinced by Jake's corporate double-speak. See Charity. This is why you need Jake's expertise. You don't understand how business valuations really work. I pulled out my own folder containing the research I had compiled about Megatech and Pinnacle's criminal conspiracy. Actually, Madison, I've been doing some business research of my own. Jake, would you like to explain why your company filed competing patent applications using my stolen research 3 weeks before Megatech made their acquisition offer? The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake's confident expression faltered, and I saw him exchange a quick glance with Madison before regaining his composure. Charity. I think you're misunderstanding standard industry practices, he said carefully. Venture capital firms routinely file provisional patents to protect emerging technologies we're evaluating for investment purposes. Using stolen research documents photographed illegally in my apartment, I pressed, Jake, I have security footage of you and Madison breaking into my home and stealing my technical specifications. Dad looked confused and alarmed. Wait, what security footage, Jake, did you actually break into Charity's apartment? Jake's corporate facade finally cracked under the pressure. Robert, the situation is more complicated than Charity is making it sound. Madison had legitimate access to the apartment, and we were simply documenting family assets that could benefit everyone. Family assets. I laughed bitterly. Jake, those patents represent 3 years of my individual research conducted at Stanford University, using my personal intellectual labor. They're not family assets any more than my diploma or my academic transcripts. Mom wrung her hands nervously, clearly struggling to understand the legal implications. Charity, honey, I don't understand all these business complications. Can't we just share the money and avoid all this conflict? Mom, what Jake and Madison did is called patent theft. It's a federal crime that can result in massive fines and prison sentences. The Megatech offer isn't legitimate business. It's the end result of organized corporate fraud. Madison started crying again, her pregnancy hormones amplifying her emotional distress. Charity, you're trying to destroy our family over money. I'm having a baby in 3 months, and instead of supporting us, you're threatening to send us to prison. Madison, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm explaining that the actions you and Jake have taken constitute serious crimes under federal law. Jake stood up abruptly, his mask completely discarded, as corporate calculation replaced family friendliness. Charity, you need to understand the realities of your situation. Megatech's offer represents the best deal you're going to receive. Rejecting it could result in years of expensive litigation that will drain your resources and ultimately leave you with nothing. Is that another threat, Jake? I asked evenly. It's an honest assessment of your negotiating position against a major corporation with unlimited legal resources and experienced patent attorneys. Dad finally spoke up, his voice heavy with confusion and disappointment. Jake, are you saying that Megatech will sue Charity if she doesn't accept their offer? Jake seemed to realize he had revealed too much about the coordinated corporate pressure campaign. Robert, corporate patent disputes are complicated matters that often benefit from early resolution rather than protracted legal warfare. I pulled out printed copies of the federal laws covering patent fraud and corporate conspiracy, spreading them across the coffee table where everyone could see the criminal penalties and sentencing guidelines. Actually, Dad, what Jake is describing is called corporate extortion. Using threats of expensive litigation to force inventors to accept below-market prices for their intellectual property is a violation of federal racketeering laws. The legal documents had an immediate sobering effect on my parents, who began reading the criminal penalties with growing alarm. Prison sentences of 5 to 20 years for patent fraud conspiracy fines of up to $5 million per violation and seizure of all assets derived from criminal activities. "Jake," Mom whispered, "could we really go to prison for helping with this patent business?" Before Jake could respond, my phone rang with a call from Sarah Chen. I answered on speaker, knowing that my family needed to hear the legal realities from a qualified attorney. "Charity, I've been in contact with federal prosecutors about your case. They're extremely interested in the evidence you've compiled about the megatech Pinnacle conspiracy. Are you available to meet with FBI investigators tomorrow morning?" The color drained from Jake's face as he realized that his corporate theft operation was about to become the subject of federal criminal investigation. I woke up Thursday morning to my phone buzzing with an urgent call from Professor Williams, my graduate research advisor. His voice carried a panic I had never heard before, immediately putting me on high alert. "Charity, something terrible has happened at the lab. Someone broke into the engineering building last night and specifically targeted your research files. Campus security footage shows 2 individuals with apparent knowledge of our building layout and laboratory locations." I felt my stomach drop as the implications hit me. "Professor Williams, what exactly was stolen?" "I keep most of my current work on personal computers and cloud storage." "They took your physical research notebooks, prototype hardware backup drives, and all the printed technical documentation from your thesis project. But here's the strangest part. Charity. They left expensive equipment untouched and ignored other students' research materials entirely. This wasn't a random burglary looking for valuable electronics. The targeted nature of the theft confirmed my worst suspicions about the escalating corporate conspiracy. Jake and his accomplices were systematically destroying evidence of my original work to make it easier for them to claim ownership of my innovations. "Professor, did campus security get clear footage of the perpetrators?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "The footage quality isn't perfect because they wore hoodies and avoided direct camera angles, but one figure appears to be a pregnant woman while the other is a tall man in business clothing. Charity, do these descriptions match anyone in your family?" Madison and Jake had escalated from apartment invasion to university burglary, apparently willing to commit increasingly serious crimes to steal my intellectual property. The pregnancy that Madison kept using to justify her actions was now helping her commit felonies against her own sister. I drove immediately to Stanford's engineering campus, where Professor Williams met me at the entrance to our research building. The normally bustling laboratories felt eerily quiet as we walked through hallways where I had spent countless hours developing the innovations that were now the target of systematic theft. The break-in occurred around 2:30 a.m., Professor Williams explained as we approached my former research station. They used a student access card to enter the building, then apparently had detailed knowledge of where your specific materials were stored. My work area had been methodically ransacked with filing cabinets, emptied computer drives removed, and even my personal coffee mug missing from the desk where I had left it. The precision of the theft was chilling. They had taken everything directly related to my research while leaving other students' work completely untouched. "Professor, how could they have student access to the building?" I asked, studying the scene of the crime. "That's the most troubling aspect," he replied grimly. "The access card used for entry belonged to Madison Williams, registered as a visiting family member for your thesis defense preparation. My sister had used her legitimate visitor access to commit burglary against me, violating not just family trust, but also university security protocols designed to protect valuable research. The betrayal reached new depths of calculated malice. Campus security officer Janet Morrison approached us with additional footage captured from exterior cameras. Ms. Williams, we have clear images of the vehicle used by the perpetrators. It's a black BMW sedan registered to Jake Morrison. Are you familiar with this individual? He's my brother-in-law. I replied, feeling sick at having to identify family members as criminal suspects. Jake Morrison works for Pinnacle Innovation Partners, a venture capital firm that's been trying to steal my patent portfolio. Officer Morrison made detailed notes about the corporate connection. This information suggests the break-in was part of a larger commercial dispute rather than simple theft. We'll be forwarding our findings to federal investigators for potential prosecution under intellectual property crime statutes. Professor Williams showed me the university's backup storage systems, which had also been compromised during the break-in. Charity, they accessed our network servers and corrupted or deleted most of your digital research files. Years of work have been systematically destroyed. How is that possible? I asked in disbelief. Don't we have multiple backup systems and security protocols? Normally, yes, but whoever did this had detailed technical knowledge of our computer systems and security architecture. They knew exactly which servers contained your files and how to access them without triggering immediate alarms. The sophistication of the cyber attack suggested corporate-level expertise far beyond what Madison and Jake could possess individually. This wasn't just family betrayal, it was professional sabotage designed to eliminate evidence of my original research and clear the way for patent theft. Professor, do we have any remaining copies of my work? I asked desperately. He led me to his personal office and opened a locked filing cabinet. I maintained private copies of your most important research as part of my faculty oversight responsibilities. It's not everything, but it includes your core algorithms, patent applications, and peer review documentation. The relief was overwhelming. My life's work hadn't been completely destroyed, though the theft had eliminated most of my supporting documentation and research development timeline. There's something else you need to know, Charity, Professor Williams continued with obvious discomfort. I was contacted last week by representatives from Megatech Industries asking about your research timeline and potential patent conflicts. What kind of questions were they asking? I demanded. They wanted to know when you first developed your core innovations, whether you had collaborated with other researchers, and if there were any prior art considerations that might affect patent validity. The corporate investigation had been far more extensive than I had realized. Megatech wasn't just making lowball acquisition offers, they were conducting detailed due diligence to identify potential weaknesses in my patent applications. Professor, did you provide them with any information about my work? I told them to contact you directly for any information about your research, he said firmly. But Charity, there's something troubling about their approach. These weren't typical corporate inquiries about licensing opportunities. They seemed more interested in finding ways to challenge your patents than in acquiring them legitimately. The pattern was becoming clear. Megatech and Pinnacle were working together to steal my innovations through a three-pronged strategy family pressure to force below-market sales, competing patent applications, using stolen research, and systematic destruction of evidence supporting my original work. Officer Morrison returned with additional security footage from campus parking areas. Ms. Williams, we have time-stamped video showing Jake Morrison and Madison Williams leaving the engineering building at 3:15 a.m. with multiple boxes and computer equipment. Can you make out what they were carrying? I asked. Your research materials based on the timing and location. But there's something else concerning in the footage. A third individual waited in a separate vehicle and received some of the stolen items before leaving in a different direction. The conspiracy extended beyond my immediate family to include unknown accomplices, suggesting a level of organization and premeditation that transformed personal betrayal into professional crime. Officer Morrison, what happens next in terms of criminal charges? I asked. We're preparing formal theft and burglary charges against both suspects. The university will also pursue violations of academic security protocols and misuse of student access privileges. Additionally, federal investigators may file intellectual property crime charges related to the corporate conspiracy. As we finished documenting the crime scene, I realized that Jake and Madison had made a critical error. Their desperation to steal my work had led them to commit obvious felonies with clear evidence trails and multiple witnesses. Instead of weakening my legal position, their criminal actions had provided prosecutors with compelling evidence of organized corporate fraud. Professor Williams walked me to my car with the recovered research files secured in a locked briefcase. Charity. I've been advising graduate students for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like this situation. Corporate pressure on young inventors is common, but coordinated family betrayal combined with university burglary represents a new level of systematic exploitation. Professor, have other students been victimized by similar schemes? Not to this extent, but I've had several graduates report family pressure to share or sell their innovations at below market prices. It appears that corporations like Megatech have learned to exploit family relationships as leverage against individual inventors. As I drove home with the recovered research files, I felt a mixture of relief and determination. The corporate conspiracy had escalated their criminal activities to the point where federal prosecution was inevitable. The question was whether I had the courage to see the process through to its conclusion, knowing that justice for my stolen innovations would likely destroy my relationship with Madison and potentially send her to prison while she was pregnant. But I also thought about other young inventors who might be targeted by similar corporate predators and the innovations that could benefit society if they weren't buried in criminal patent manipulation schemes. My individual case had become part of a larger battle for intellectual property rights and protection of vulnerable innovators against systematic corporate exploitation. Friday afternoon brought another devastating revelation when I received an unexpected call from my Aunt Linda, who sounded frantic and barely coherent through her tears. "Charity, sweetheart, I just got the most disturbing call from your mother. She's talking about losing the house bankruptcy and some kind of criminal investigation. What on earth is happening with your family?" I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot to take the call properly, my heart sinking as I anticipated another layer of family crisis. "Aunt Linda, how much do you know about the situation with my patents and Madison?" "Very little, honestly. Your mother called this morning crying hysterically about legal papers and foreclosure notices. She mentioned something about Madison being pregnant and needing money and you refusing to help the family. Charity, that doesn't sound like you at all." The family narrative was clearly being shaped to cast me as the villain refusing to support my pregnant sister, while hiding the criminal conspiracy that had actually created the crisis. "Aunt Linda, I need to explain what's really been happening. Madison and her husband have been trying to steal my intellectual property with help from a corporate fraud scheme. The legal investigation is focused on their criminal activities, not my unwillingness to share." I gave her a condensed version of the graduation confrontation, apartment burglary, university break-in, and corporate conspiracy watching through the coffee shop window as normal families shared afternoon treats while my own family imploded from greed and criminal behavior. "Oh my God, Charity," Aunt Linda whispered when I finished the account. "Madison and Jake actually broke into your apartment and university to steal your research, and your parents supported this. They've been manipulated by Madison and Jake's lies about family obligations and shared wealth. But Aunt Linda, the financial crisis is apparently much worse than anyone told me." "What do you mean?" "I'm discovering that my parents have been making terrible financial decisions for years, using their home and retirement savings to fund Madison's failed business ventures and lifestyle choices." Aunt Linda was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Charity, there's something I need to tell you about your family's finances. Your Uncle Frank and I have been worried for years about your parents' money management, but we didn't want to interfere in their personal business." "What kind of money management problems?" "They've been borrowing against their home equity repeatedly to cover Madison's expenses. Her wedding cost $40,000 that they couldn't afford. Her boutique business required another $30,000 in startup capital that was never repaid. Every time Madison has a financial crisis, your parents refinance or take out loans to bail her out. The pattern of financial enabling stretched back years, creating a foundation of debt and poor decisions that made my parents vulnerable to the current patent theft scheme. Aunt Linda, do you know how much debt they're carrying currently? Frank estimates they owe at least $200,000 between their mortgage home equity loans, credit card debt, and personal loans from family members. At their age and income level, it's essentially impossible for them to recover financially. $200,000 in debt explained my parents' desperate support for Madison's patent theft plan. They weren't just enabling her criminal behavior, they were facing their own financial ruin and saw my innovations as their only path to avoiding bankruptcy and homelessness. Has Madison been contributing anything to help with the family's financial situation? I asked. Aunt Linda laughed bitterly. Contributing Charity Madison has been living rent-free in your parents' basement for the past year, while Jake's income supposedly supports their lifestyle. But they keep asking your parents for money to cover unexpected expenses and temporary cash flow problems. So Madison and Jake are draining my parents' resources while planning to steal my patents for their own financial benefit. It appears that way, and now that their theft scheme has been exposed, your parents are facing criminal liability on top of their existing financial crisis. I felt overwhelmed by the scope of the disaster that greed and criminal behavior had created for my entire family. Even if criminal charges were dropped or reduced, the financial damage seemed irreversible. Aunt Linda, what are my parents' realistic options at this point? Bankruptcy is probably inevitable unless they receive substantial financial assistance. At their ages, they can't generate enough income to service their existing debt load, especially if legal bills are added to their expenses. The cruel irony was that my patents were worth enough to solve my parents' financial problems easily, but only if I cooperated with the criminal conspiracy to steal them. Refusing to be victimized meant watching my family face financial ruin as a consequence of their own poor decisions and criminal choices. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for what I knew would be an emotionally devastating confrontation about their financial situation and criminal liability. The driveway was crowded with cars, suggesting that extended family members had gathered for what was probably a crisis intervention meeting. Uncle Frank met me at the front door with a grim expression. "Charity, I'm glad you came. Your parents need to understand the reality of their situation both financially and legally." The living room was packed with family members I hadn't seen in months: Aunt Linda, Uncle Frank, my cousin Sarah, and Madison's mother-in-law, Patricia, who had apparently been kept informed about the patent theft scheme. Mom sat in her favorite armchair looking decades older than her actual age, with papers scattered across her lap that appeared to be legal documents and financial statements. Dad paced near the fireplace with obvious agitation, while Madison huddled on the couch with red-rimmed eyes and tissues clutched in her hands. Jake was notably absent, which seemed ominous given the family gathering's apparent focus on resolving the crisis he had largely created. "Charity," Dad began without preamble. "We need to find a solution that works for everyone. This legal investigation is destroying our family and threatening our financial survival." Uncle Frank held up a stack of financial documents. "Robert, before we discuss solutions, everyone needs to understand exactly how serious your financial situation has become." He spread mortgage statements, loan documents, and credit card bills across the coffee table, creating a paper trail of fiscal irresponsibility that painted a devastating picture of my parents' money management over the past 5 years. "Your current debt load exceeds $230,000, Uncle Frank announced. "Between mortgage payments, home equity loans, credit card minimums, and personal loan obligations, your monthly debt service is $4,800. Mom gasped at the number, apparently unaware of how completely their finances had deteriorated. "Frank, that can't be right. We don't have nearly that much in monthly payments." "Linda, you're only counting the loans you know about. Robert has been taking payday loans and cash advances to cover the monthly payments on your other debts. The interest rates on those short-term loans are creating a spiral that's mathematically impossible to escape." Dad's face flushed with embarrassment as his financial deceptions were exposed to the entire family. Frank, those were temporary solutions to bridge cash flow gaps. Once Madison's patent deal comes through, we can pay everything off and start fresh. What patent deal? Uncle Frank demanded. Robert Madison and Jake have been charged with felony theft and burglary. There is no legitimate patent deal. Cousin Sarah, who worked as a paralegal, opened her laptop and displayed criminal law websites showing typical sentences for intellectual property crimes. Uncle Robert, Aunt Linda, you need to understand that if Madison and Jake are convicted of patent fraud conspiracy, they could face 5 to 20 years in federal prison. Madison broke down completely at the mention of prison sentences, sobbing uncontrollably while pressing her hands against her pregnant belly. I can't go to prison while I'm pregnant. The baby needs me. Patricia, Madison's mother-in-law, finally spoke up with obvious anger. Madison, honey, you should have thought about your baby before you committed crimes to steal your sister's life work. I wasn't stealing anything, Madison protested through her tears. I was trying to help Charity share her success with the family instead of keeping everything for herself. By breaking into her apartment and university to steal her research files, Patricia shot back. Madison, that's not helping. That's criminal behavior that could destroy your child's future. The family confrontation continued for over 2 hours with various relatives attempting to broker solutions that would minimize criminal liability while addressing the financial crisis. But every proposed compromise required me to surrender my intellectual property rights to criminals who had betrayed my trust and violated my privacy. Uncle Frank finally addressed me directly. Charity, I understand your anger about the theft attempt, and I support your right to protect your innovations. But is there any way to resolve this situation that doesn't result in Madison going to prison while she's pregnant? The question hung in the air as everyone stared at me, waiting for an answer that would somehow magically solve the crisis that criminal behavior and fiscal irresponsibility had created. Uncle Frank, I didn't create this situation, I replied carefully. Madison and Jake made deliberate choices to commit crimes against me. The consequences of those choices aren't my responsibility to fix. But you have the power to influence the outcome, he pressed. If you were willing to share some portion of your patent value, criminal charges might be reduced and the family's financial crisis could be resolved. I realized that even the extended family members who sympathized with my situation were still hoping I would sacrifice my financial future to solve problems created by other people's criminal behavior and poor decisions. I need everyone to understand something very clearly, I said, standing up to address the entire room. My patents are worth $60 to $90 million. Sharing that wealth with people who tried to steal it from me would be rewarding criminal behavior and enabling future victimization of other inventors. The room fell silent as the full value of my innovations became clear to everyone present. Even Uncle Frank looked stunned by the scope of the money involved. 60 to 90 million, Dad whispered. Charity, are you absolutely certain about those numbers? Those are conservative estimates based on licensing potential and acquisition interest from legitimate corporations. Madison looked up through her tears with renewed desperation. Charity, with that much money, you could easily solve all our problems and still be incredibly wealthy yourself. Why won't you help your family? Madison, my family tried to steal my life's work through criminal conspiracy. Why would I reward that behavior by voluntarily giving you the wealth you attempted to obtain through fraud? As I left that evening, I realized that the financial crisis had created a moral test for everyone involved. Would we reward criminal behavior to avoid its consequences, or would we insist on accountability even when it caused additional family suffering? The answer to that question would determine not just my family's future, but also whether other young inventors would be victimized by similar corporate predators who exploited family relationships to steal intellectual property. Monday morning brought a shocking phone call from Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, the Dean of Stanford's Engineering Department, requesting an immediate meeting about serious concerns regarding faculty conduct and corporate partnerships. Her formal tone suggested that my patent theft case had exposed problems extending far beyond my individual situation. I arrived at her office to find Professor Williams already seated across from her massive mahogany desk, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. The atmosphere felt tense, like the moment before a major academic disciplinary hearing. Ms. Williams. Dean Hawthorne began without preamble. We've conducted an internal investigation following the break-in at our research facilities. What we discovered raises troubling questions about faculty involvement in corporate intellectual property manipulation. Professor Williams shifted nervously in his chair. Elizabeth, I think you're overstating the situation. My interactions with Megatech were standard industry consultation arrangements. Richard, you failed to disclose that Megatech has been funding your research laboratory for the past 2 years in exchange for early access to promising student innovations. Dean Hawthorne replied coldly. That represents a massive conflict of interest that should have been reported to university administration. My stomach dropped as the implications became clear. My own thesis advisor had been secretly working with the same corporation that was trying to steal my patents, creating a betrayal that extended from my family to my academic mentors. Professor Williams, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, you've been sharing information about my research with Megatech while advising me on patent protection strategies. His face reddened with obvious guilt. Charity, the arrangement wasn't specifically about your work. Megatech provides general funding for emerging technology research, and I occasionally update them on promising developments within appropriate ethical boundaries. What constitutes appropriate ethical boundaries when discussing student research with corporate sponsors? Dean Hawthorne demanded. Professor Williams fumbled through a folder of documents before producing what appeared to be a corporate consulting agreement. The contract specifies that I can share general information about research directions and potential commercial applications without violating student confidentiality. Dean Hawthorne reviewed the contract with obvious disapproval. Richard, this agreement essentially makes you a corporate scout, identifying valuable innovations before students understand their commercial worth. How is that not a massive conflict of interest? The funding supports important research that benefits all our students, he protested weakly. Without corporate partnerships, we couldn't maintain our laboratory equipment or provide competitive research opportunities. I felt betrayed on a level I hadn't thought possible. The professor who had guided my academic development and advised me on intellectual property protection had been secretly feeding information about my work to corporate predators, trying to steal it. Professor Williams, did you tell Megatech about my research timeline, patent applications, and commercial potential? I asked directly. I may have mentioned that you were developing promising innovations in renewable energy and mobile security, he admitted reluctantly, but I never shared specific technical details or proprietary information. You shared enough information for them to coordinate their acquisition offer with my family's pressure campaign, I pointed out. The timing wasn't coincidental, was it? Dean Hawthorne pulled up additional files on her computer. Ms. Williams, our investigation revealed that Professor Williams has had similar consulting arrangements, affecting at least 12 other graduate students over the past 3 years. In several cases, promising innovations were acquired by Megatech at below market prices shortly after students completed their thesis research. 12 other students, I repeated in disbelief. Professor Williams, you've been systematically betraying students' intellectual property rights for corporate consulting fees. That's an unfair characterization, he protested. I've helped numerous students connect with industry opportunities and corporate funding sources. Some of those relationships led to beneficial acquisition agreements. Beneficial for whom? Dean Hawthorne demanded. Richard, we have documentation showing that Megatech acquired patents worth over $200 million from Stanford graduate students, paying an average of $12 million per portfolio. Those students were systematically undercompensated for innovations that generated massive corporate profits. The scope of the academic betrayal was staggering. My situation wasn't an isolated incident of corporate opportunism, but part of a systematic exploitation network that used faculty relationships to identify and steal student innovations. Dean Hawthorne, what's being done to protect current students from similar exploitation? I asked. We're implementing new disclosure requirements for faculty consulting arrangements, mandatory oversight of corporate partnerships, and enhanced intellectual property protection for student research. Additionally, we're cooperating with federal investigators who are examining similar patterns at other universities. Professor Williams looked increasingly desperate as his academic career imploded around him. Elizabeth, you're destroying my reputation over standard industry consulting practices. Every major research university maintains corporate partnerships. Not every professor uses those partnerships to systematically exploit student innovations for personal financial gain. She replied sharply, Richard, your consulting fees from Megatech exceed $200,000 over the past 2 years. You've been profiting directly from information about student research that you're supposed to protect. The financial motivation behind his betrayal made the personal violation even more painful. Professor Williams hadn't just failed to protect my interests, he had actively worked against them for corporate money. Professor Williams, I said, feeling a mixture of anger and disappointment. Did you ever consider warning me that Megatech was targeting my innovations? Did you ever think about protecting my financial interests instead of serving corporate sponsors? Charity, I genuinely believe that connecting promising students with industry partners created beneficial opportunities. I never intended to harm your financial prospects. But you knew that Megatech was systematically undervaluing student patents and acquiring them through pressure tactics. Dean Hawthorne pressed. Professor Williams hesitated before responding, his silence effectively confirming his awareness of the corporate exploitation scheme. Richard, your employment with Stanford University is terminated effective immediately, Dean Hawthorne announced. Security will escort you from campus and all corporate consulting arrangements are being transferred to university administration for legal review. I watched my former thesis advisor gather his personal belongings with a mixture of vindication and sadness. The man who had guided my academic development had betrayed my trust for corporate consulting fees, but his downfall still felt tragic in its scope and finality. Ms. Williams. Dean Hawthorne continued after Professor Williams left, we want to offer you whatever support we can in pursuing criminal charges and civil damages against the individuals and corporations involved in this conspiracy. What kind of support? Legal testimony about the systematic nature of the exploitation documentation of Professor Williams' conflict of interest and cooperation with federal investigators examining similar patterns at other universities. She pulled up additional research files showing corporate patent acquisition patterns across multiple academic institutions. Charity, your case has helped expose a nationwide network of corporate intellectual property theft targeting young inventors. Megatech and similar companies have been systematically exploiting faculty relationships and family pressure to steal innovations worth billions of dollars. How many other students have been victimized by similar schemes? Our preliminary research suggests hundreds of graduate students and recent graduates have been pressured into underselling their patents to corporations using information obtained through faculty consultants and family manipulation. The revelation transformed my individual case into part of a much larger battle for intellectual property rights and protection of vulnerable inventors against systematic corporate predation. Dean Hawthorne, what happens to Professor Williams now? He'll likely face criminal charges for conspiracy to defraud students' intellectual property rights violations of academic ethics standards and potentially federal racketeering charges if prosecutors can prove organized criminal activity. As I left Dean Hawthorne's office with documentation of the university's cooperation in my case, I realized that the corporate conspiracy had made a critical error by targeting my innovations. Instead of quietly stealing another student's work, they had chosen a victim who was willing and able to fight back, ultimately exposing their entire network of academic and corporate corruption. The question now was whether federal prosecutors would have the resources and political will to pursue criminal charges against a sophisticated corporate conspiracy that had been systematically stealing intellectual property from young inventors across the country. Tuesday morning, I sat in the imposing federal building in downtown San Francisco, waiting to meet with FBI Special Agent Monica Rodriguez and federal prosecutor David Chen about potential criminal charges against the corporate conspiracy that had targeted my patents. The marble corridors and serious-faced officials made the gravity of the situation feel overwhelmingly real. Agent Rodriguez led me to a conference room equipped with recording devices and multiple computer screens, where Prosecutor Chen had assembled thick folders of evidence and legal documents spanning several ongoing investigations into corporate intellectual property theft. Ms. Williams. Agent Rodriguez began, "Your case provides crucial evidence linking individual patent theft to organized corporate racketeering. We've been investigating Megatech and Pinnacle Innovation Partners for 18 months without sufficient proof of criminal conspiracy. Your documentation changes that calculus completely." Prosecutor Chen opened his laptop and displayed charts showing corporate acquisition patterns, financial transfers between companies, and coordination timelines that painted a picture of systematic criminal activity. Charity Megatech and Pinnacle have acquired over $3 billion worth of patents from young inventors over the past 5 years, paying an average of 15% of actual market value. Your case provides direct evidence of the coercion and fraud tactics they use to manipulate inventors into accepting inadequate compensation. "What kind of evidence do you need from me to build criminal cases?" I asked. "Everything you've documented about family pressure, corporate coordination, break-ins, stolen research, and threats of retaliation. Plus, we need your cooperation in building similar cases against other victims who haven't come forward yet." Agent Rodriguez showed me files from dozens of other young inventors who'd been pressured into selling their patents to Megatech at below-market prices, often following patterns of family pressure and corporate manipulation identical to my experience. "These inventors had no idea they were part of a larger criminal conspiracy," she explained. "Most believed they were receiving legitimate business offers or helping their families through financial difficulties." "How many other inventors are we talking about?" I asked, scanning the extensive files. "At least 47 confirmed victims over the past 5 years, representing intellectual property theft exceeding $2 billion in actual value," Prosecutor Chen replied. "Your case provides the missing evidence we need to prove organized criminal activity rather than individual instances of corporate opportunism." I spent the next 3 hours providing detailed testimony about every aspect of my case, from the graduation confrontation through the university burglary and corporate threats. Federal investigators recorded everything while building comprehensive criminal cases against everyone involved in the conspiracy. Charity were prepared to file federal charges including organized racketeering conspiracy to defraud intellectual property rights, computer crimes, and corporate extortion, Prosecutor Chen explained. "But we need your commitment to see this process through to completion, potentially including years of litigation and testimony." "What about my family members?" I asked. "Madison is pregnant and my parents were manipulated into participating. Do they face the same criminal penalties as Jake and the corporate executives?" Agent Rodriguez consulted her notes about the different levels of criminal involvement. Jake Morrison faces the most serious charges because he was the primary link between family manipulation and corporate theft. Madison and your parents could receive reduced sentences if they cooperate with our investigation and provide testimony against the primary conspirators. But they still face potential prison time. Madison committed felony burglary and theft, which carry mandatory minimum sentences. Your parents could be charged as accessories to fraud, though first-time offenders often receive probation rather than incarceration. The prospect of sending my pregnant sister to federal prison still made me feel sick, despite understanding that her criminal choices had created the consequences she now faced. What happens if I decide not to cooperate with federal prosecution? I asked. Prosecutor Chen leaned back in his chair and considered the implications. The corporate conspiracy would likely escape meaningful prosecution. Megatech and Pinnacle would continue systematically stealing intellectual property from other young inventors. Your family members would still face local charges for the break-ins and theft, but without federal conspiracy charges. So my cooperation determines whether this pattern of corporate theft gets stopped or continues victimizing other inventors. Essentially, yes. Your case provides the evidence and legal framework needed to dismantle this entire criminal network. I thought about the dozens of other young inventors who had been victimized by similar schemes and the innovations that could benefit society if they weren't buried in corporate patent manipulation operations. Agent Rodriguez, if I cooperate fully with federal prosecution, what kind of timeline are we looking at for resolution? Criminal trials typically take 18 to 36 months depending on the complexity of evidence and corporate legal challenges. Civil damages could take an additional 2 to 4 years to resolve completely. And during that time, my patents remain tied up in litigation rather than being developed or licensed. Not necessarily, Prosecutor Chen interjected. We can seek protective orders preventing corporate interference with your patent rights while criminal cases proceed. You'd be free to pursue legitimate licensing agreements or acquisition offers. The prospect of years of legal warfare was daunting, but I realized that avoiding the fight would mean letting corporate predators continue stealing innovations from vulnerable inventors across the country. I want to move forward with full federal prosecution, I announced, not just for my own patents, but to stop this systematic exploitation of other inventors. Agent Rodriguez smiled approvingly. Charity, your decision will help protect hundreds of other young innovators from being victimized by similar corporate theft schemes. Over the next 2 hours, we planned the comprehensive legal strategy that would dismantle the corporate conspiracy while protecting my patent rights and minimizing family destruction where possible. What about Madison's pregnancy? I asked as we prepared to conclude the meeting. Is there any way to delay her sentencing until after the baby is born? If she cooperates fully with our investigation and provides testimony against Jake and the corporate conspirators, we can recommend delayed sentencing and potentially reduced charges, Prosecutor Chen explained. The goal is justice not destroying families unnecessarily. And my parents? First-time offenders who were clearly manipulated by more sophisticated criminals rarely receive harsh sentences. Probation, community service, and restitution are more likely outcomes than incarceration. As I left the federal building with legal documents authorizing the comprehensive investigation, I felt a mixture of determination and apprehension about the battle ahead. The corporate conspiracy had made a fatal error by targeting my innovations, ultimately providing federal prosecutors with the evidence needed to expose and prosecute their entire criminal network. The question now was whether I had the emotional strength to endure years of legal warfare while watching my family face the consequences of their criminal choices and betrayal of my trust. But I also thought about the young inventors who would be protected from similar victimization and the innovations that could benefit society if they were developed legitimately rather than stolen through corporate fraud schemes. The fight ahead would be difficult, but it was necessary to protect both individual intellectual property rights and the broader system of innovation that drives technological progress in America. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected call from investigative journalist Rebecca Martinez at TechCrunch, who had somehow learned about my case through federal law enforcement sources and wanted to discuss a major expose on corporate patent theft targeting young inventors. Ms. Williams, she said during our phone conversation, I've been investigating systematic intellectual property theft in Silicon Valley for 6 months. Your case provides the missing piece that connects individual patent fraud to organized corporate racketeering. I met Rebecca at a quiet coffee shop in Palo Alto where she showed me preliminary research documenting similar patent theft schemes affecting dozens of other recent graduates from prestigious universities across the country. Her investigation had uncovered a network of corporations using family pressure and academic betrayal to steal innovations worth billions of dollars. Charity Megatech and Pinnacle Innovation Partners aren't isolated bad actors. She explained spreading printed documents across our table. They're part of a systematic industry practice that exploits the vulnerability of young inventors who lack legal resources and business experience. Her research files contain stories remarkably similar to mine family members pressured into demanding patent transfers, professors secretly sharing student research with corporate sponsors, and sophisticated manipulation campaigns designed to force below-market patent sales. Rebecca, how many other inventors have been victimized by these schemes? My investigation has documented at least 60 confirmed cases over the past 7 years representing intellectual property theft exceeding $4 billion in actual market value. She replied grimly. Most victims never realized they were part of organized criminal activity. She showed me interview transcripts from other young inventors who'd been pressured into selling their patents to Megatech and similar corporations after experiencing family pressure campaigns and academic betrayal identical to my situation. The corporate strategy is brilliant in its simplicity, Rebecca continued. Target promising innovations from recent graduates who are emotionally and financially vulnerable. Use faculty consultants to identify valuable patents before inventors understand their commercial worth. Apply family pressure and financial manipulation to force quick sales at below-market prices. What happens to the stolen innovations after corporations acquire them? Megatech typically licenses them to competitors for 10 to 20 times what they paid the original inventors. Your renewable energy algorithms, for example, could generate over $200 million in licensing revenue over the next decade. The scope of the systematic theft was staggering. Corporations weren't just stealing individual patents, they were operating sophisticated networks designed to identify and acquire valuable innovations through fraud and manipulation. Rebecca, what kind of impact would a major media expose have on these corporate practices? Public attention and regulatory scrutiny could force changes in industry practices, especially if federal prosecutors file criminal charges based on your evidence. Media coverage also encourages other victims to come forward and seek justice. Over the next hour, we planned a comprehensive media strategy that would expose the corporate conspiracy while protecting my legal interests and family privacy where possible. Charity, I want to publish your story as the centerpiece of a broader investigation into systematic patent theft. Your case provides concrete evidence of criminal activity that previous victims couldn't document as thoroughly. What about corporate retaliation? I asked. Megatech has substantial resources and experienced legal teams. That's why timing is crucial. We'll coordinate publication with federal criminal filings, making corporate intimidation tactics much more difficult and legally risky. Rebecca contacted her editors at TechCrunch, while I called Agent Rodriguez to coordinate media timing with criminal prosecution strategy. The federal investigation was progressing rapidly with arrest warrants being prepared for Jake and several corporate executives. Agent Rodriguez, how will media coverage affect your criminal cases? I asked during our phone conversation. Public attention typically helps federal prosecution by encouraging additional victims to come forward and creating political pressure for aggressive enforcement. We support coordinated media exposure as long as it doesn't compromise ongoing investigations. Thursday afternoon, Rebecca's comprehensive expose went live on TechCrunch with the headline, "The Patent Thieves: How Silicon Valley Corporations Systematically Steal Innovation from Young Inventors." My story anchored the investigation with detailed documentation of the family pressure campaign, academic betrayal, and corporate conspiracy. The article included interviews with 12 other victims of similar patent theft schemes, financial analysis showing billions of dollars in stolen intellectual property, and expert commentary about the need for stronger protection of young inventors' rights. Within hours, the story exploded across social media platforms, technology news websites, and major mainstream publications. Patent theft began trending on Twitter as other victims shared their experiences with corporate manipulation and family pressure campaigns. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, other young inventors sharing similar stories, and supporters expressing outrage about systematic corporate exploitation of vulnerable innovators. The response was overwhelming in both scope and emotional intensity. By Friday morning, Megatech's stock price had plummeted 12% as investors reacted to allegations of systematic criminal activity and potential federal prosecution. Corporate executives issued carefully worded denials, while their legal teams scrambled to contain the public relations disaster. Pinnacle Innovation Partners faced even more severe market consequences, with several major clients canceling consulting contracts and demanding investigations into their patent acquisition practices. Jake's employer was rapidly distancing itself from the criminal allegations while conducting internal reviews of questionable deals. Charity, the media exposure has been even more effective than we anticipated, Rebecca reported during a follow-up call. We've received tips about similar corporate patent theft operations targeting universities nationwide. Your case has opened floodgates of evidence about systematic intellectual property crime. The most encouraging development was the number of other young inventors who contacted me directly through social media, sharing stories of family pressure and corporate manipulation that had forced them to undersell their innovations. Many expressed interest in pursuing legal action after learning about the organized nature of the schemes that had victimized them. Saturday brought a particularly satisfying development when Madison called me for the first time since the federal investigation began, her voice shaking with fear and desperation. "Charity, the news coverage is destroying our family's reputation," she sobbed through the phone. "Everyone in town knows about the criminal charges and patent theft. Jake's employer fired him, and I can't show my face anywhere without people staring and whispering." Madison, the media coverage is simply reporting the facts about criminal activities that you and Jake chose to commit. The consequences are the natural result of your decisions. "But I'm pregnant," she protested. "The stress is affecting the baby. My doctor says I need to avoid emotional trauma during the final months of pregnancy." "Then you should have considered that before committing felonies to steal my life's work." Madison broke down completely sobbing about criminal liability, financial ruin, and social ostracism that had resulted from her participation in the patent theft conspiracy. The pregnancy that she had used to justify stealing my innovations was now making the consequences of her criminal choices more difficult to bear. "Charity, please, there has to be some way to fix this situation. I can't go to prison while I'm pregnant. The baby needs me." "Madison, you can cooperate fully with federal prosecutors and provide testimony against Jake and the corporate executives who organized this criminal conspiracy. Agent Rodriguez told me that cooperation could significantly reduce your charges." "But that means betraying Jake and potentially sending him to prison for decades. Jake betrayed our entire family by manipulating us into a criminal conspiracy for his employer's benefit. Why do you feel loyalty to someone who destroyed your life for corporate profit?" The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Madison gradually accepting that her only path to reduced criminal liability required full cooperation with federal prosecution and complete honesty about Jake's role in organizing the patent theft scheme. Sunday evening brought news that federal prosecutors had obtained arrest warrants for Jake, 3 Megatech executives, and 2 Pinnacle Innovation Partners principals based on evidence from my case and testimony from other victims who had come forward after the media coverage. "Charity, your decision to go public has created a domino effect that's dismantling the entire corporate patent theft network," Agent Rodriguez reported. We now have evidence of systematic criminal activity affecting over 100 young inventors across 15 states. The media strategy had exceeded all expectations, transforming my individual case into a national conversation about protecting intellectual property rights and preventing corporate exploitation of vulnerable innovators. The public attention had encouraged dozens of other victims to seek justice, while creating political pressure for aggressive federal prosecution of corporate patent theft. Most importantly, the exposure had eliminated any possibility that Megatech and Pinnacle could continue their systematic theft operations without facing serious legal consequences and ongoing regulatory scrutiny. As I prepared for the next phase of federal prosecution and civil litigation, I felt a sense of vindication about the decision to fight back against corporate predators rather than accepting their fraudulent terms. The battle was far from over, but the media exposure had fundamentally shifted the balance of power in favor of young inventors and against systematic corporate exploitation. Monday morning brought the most emotionally devastating phone call of the entire ordeal when Mom contacted me with news that would forever change our family dynamics and relationships. "Charity, sweetheart, your father and I need to see you immediately. We've learned some things about Jake and Madison that we should have discovered months ago." Her voice carried a weight of regret and disillusionment that I had never heard before. I drove to their house with mixed feelings of apprehension and hope. The media coverage had exposed the scope of the corporate conspiracy, but I still didn't know how much my parents understood about their own manipulation and betrayal. I found them sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by financial documents, legal papers, and printed emails that painted a devastating picture of systematic deception and exploitation. Dad looked like he had aged a decade in the past week, while Mom's eyes showed the hollow exhaustion of someone whose fundamental beliefs had been shattered. "Charity, we owe you an apology that can never adequately express our shame and regret." Dad began, his voice breaking with emotion. "We've spent the weekend reviewing our financial records and communications with Madison and Jake, and we finally understand how completely they manipulated us." Mom pushed a folder across the table containing bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, forged signatures on loan documents, and evidence that Madison and Jake had been stealing money from my parents' accounts for over a year. They convinced us that borrowing against our home equity was necessary to support Madison's pregnancy and business ventures, Mom explained through tears. But we discovered that most of the money went to Jake's personal expenses and luxury purchases rather than legitimate family needs. The financial documents revealed a pattern of systematic theft that had stripped my parents of their retirement savings, home equity, and financial security, while funding Jake's lifestyle and corporate advancement within Pinnacle Innovation Partners. "Dad, how much money did Madison and Jake steal from you directly?" "At least $80,000 through unauthorized account access, forged loan applications, and false claims about medical expenses," he replied, studying the bank statements with obvious devastation. "They used my pregnancy as emotional manipulation to justify stealing from my own parents." Madison's voice came from the living room doorway, where she stood with red-rimmed eyes and a noticeably larger pregnant belly. I turned in surprise, not expecting to see her at this family meeting. "Madison, what are you doing here?" "I came to confess everything and beg your forgiveness," she said, moving slowly to an empty chair at the kitchen table. "Jake abandoned me yesterday when the arrest warrants were issued. He disappeared with our joint savings account and left me to face criminal charges alone." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Jake had manipulated Madison into criminal activity, then abandoned her to face the consequences while he fled with their remaining financial resources. "Madison, where is Jake now?" "I don't know. FBI agents came to arrest him yesterday morning, but he had already emptied our bank accounts and disappeared. Agent Rodriguez thinks he might have fled to a country without extradition treaties." Mom reached across the table to grasp Madison's hand with obvious compassion, despite the betrayal and criminal activity. "Sweetheart, we had no idea how manipulated you were by Jake's schemes." "That doesn't excuse my choices," Madison replied firmly. I broke into Charity's apartment, stole her research, and committed burglary at Stanford. I made those decisions voluntarily, even if Jake convinced me they were justified. I felt a mixture of relief and continued anger about Madison's apparent recognition of her criminal behavior and moral responsibility. Madison, what changed your perspective about the patent theft scheme? Finding out that Jake had been stealing from our own parents while claiming everything was for my benefit and the baby's future. He manipulated my pregnancy fears and financial desperation to turn me into a criminal accomplice. She pulled out her phone and showed me text messages between Jake and unknown contacts discussing patent theft operations affecting dozens of other young inventors with specific references to emotional manipulation tactics and family pressure strategies. Charity Jake bragged to his criminal associates about how easy it was to manipulate pregnant women and elderly parents into pressuring their successful children to surrender valuable intellectual property. The messages were nauseating in their casual discussion of exploiting family relationships for corporate profit, treating emotional manipulation as a refined technique rather than criminal behavior. Madison, are you willing to provide this evidence to federal prosecutors and testify against Jake and his corporate associates? Yes, completely. Agent Rodriguez explained that full cooperation could reduce my charges and potentially allow delayed sentencing until after the baby is born. Dad spoke up with obvious determination despite his emotional devastation. Charity, your mother, and I also want to cooperate fully with federal prosecution. We were fools who allowed ourselves to be manipulated, but we understand now that Jake was the architect of this entire criminal conspiracy. What about restitution for the financial theft from your accounts? I asked. The FBI is working to recover our stolen money through asset seizure and criminal restitution orders, Mom explained. But even if we recover every dollar, we'll still face bankruptcy because of the loans and debts that Jake manipulated us into assuming. The financial devastation was comprehensive and probably irreversible. Even with criminal restitution, my parents would likely lose their home and retirement security as consequences of Jake's systematic exploitation. Mom, Dad, I want you to understand something important. I said, feeling the weight of family responsibility despite their betrayal. When my patents are successfully licensed or acquired, I will ensure that you don't lose your home or face poverty in retirement. Charity, we don't deserve your financial support after everything we did to pressure you into surrendering your innovations, Dad protested. You were victims of sophisticated manipulation by professional criminals. The real villains are Jake and the corporate executives who orchestrated this systematic exploitation scheme. Madison broke down crying again, but this time her tears seemed to express genuine remorse rather than self-pity. Charity, I don't expect your forgiveness, and I know I'll face criminal consequences for my choices. But I want you to know that I finally understand how brilliant and valuable your innovations are, and how wrong I was to try stealing them. Madison, what will you do about the baby if you receive a prison sentence? Mom and Dad have agreed to provide childcare support during any incarceration period. Agent Rodriguez thinks cooperation could result in probation rather than immediate imprisonment, especially given my pregnancy. Over the next 2 hours, we planned the family's cooperation strategy with federal prosecutors while addressing the financial crisis that Jake's theft had created for my parents' retirement security. Charity, we know we can never undo the damage we caused by supporting Madison's criminal scheme, Mom said as our meeting concluded. But we hope that someday you might be able to forgive us for betraying your trust and threatening your life's work. The forgiveness process will take time, but I understand that you were manipulated by a professional criminal who exploited your love for Madison and concern about her pregnancy. As I prepared to leave, Madison asked to speak with me privately on the front porch, where we had shared countless childhood conversations before corporate greed and criminal conspiracy destroyed our family relationships. Charity, I need you to understand that my participation in stealing your patents wasn't just about money or pregnancy fears. I was jealous of your success and achievements, and Jake exploited that jealousy to convince me that you owed the family compensation for your advantages. Madison, what advantages are you referring to? Your intelligence, academic success, and ability to create innovations that could change the world. I felt like a failure in comparison, and Jake convinced me that stealing from you was justified because life had been unfair to me. The honest admission of jealousy and resentment provided context for her criminal choices, while confirming that the manipulation had been carefully targeted at her specific emotional vulnerabilities. Madison, I hope you understand now that my success came from years of hard work and personal sacrifice, not unfair advantages or family favoritism. I understand that completely now. Jake showed me financial projections about your patent values, and I finally comprehend the magnitude of innovation and effort that your work represents. Trying to steal that from you was unforgivable. As I drove home from the family meeting, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and cautious optimism about eventual healing. The corporate conspiracy had been exposed, Jake had been identified as the primary criminal architect, and my family was finally cooperating with federal prosecution, rather than continuing their participation in patent theft. The emotional damage would take years to repair, but the foundation for eventual forgiveness and restored relationships had been established through honest acknowledgement of criminal behavior and genuine commitment to justice. Tuesday morning brought the news I had been waiting for when Agent Rodriguez called to inform me that coordinated FBI raids were being conducted simultaneously at Megatech headquarters in Seattle, Pinnacle Innovation Partners offices in San Francisco, and Jake's apartment complex where he had been located trying to destroy evidence. Charity, we arrested Jake Morrison at 6 a.m. along with 3 Megatech executives and 2 Pinnacle principals. Agent Rodriguez reported with obvious satisfaction. The raids recovered extensive documentation of their patent theft operations, including your stolen research files and evidence of similar schemes affecting dozens of other inventors. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with relief that the criminal conspiracy was finally facing serious law enforcement consequences. The months of family betrayal, academic violations, and corporate threats were culminating in arrests and criminal charges that could dismantle the entire theft network. Agent Rodriguez, what kind of evidence did you recover during the raids? Computer files documenting systematic patent theft operations, financial records showing payments to corrupt faculty consultants, and communications, proving coordination between family pressure campaigns and corporate acquisition offers. Jake's apartment contained detailed files on over 60 young inventors targeted for patent theft. The scope of the criminal operation exceeded even my worst suspicions about systematic corporate exploitation of vulnerable innovators. Jake hadn't just manipulated my family, he had been operating a sophisticated intelligence network identifying and targeting promising inventors across multiple universities. What about the stolen research files from my apartment and Stanford? Recovered completely along with similar files stolen from other inventors. Jake maintained detailed archives of stolen intellectual property, apparently as insurance against his corporate employers. I drove immediately to the federal building to review the evidence recovered during the raids, meeting with Prosecutor Chen and Agent Rodriguez in the same conference room where we had planned the legal counterattack months earlier. Charity, the evidence we recovered transforms your individual case into a comprehensive criminal conspiracy involving multiple corporations, universities, and hundreds of victim inventors. Prosecutor Chen explained displaying computer screens filled with financial transactions and corporate communications. The recovered files painted a picture of systematic criminal activity that had been operating for over 7 years, generating billions of dollars in stolen intellectual property, while destroying the careers and financial futures of young inventors across the country. Jake Morrison maintained detailed spreadsheets tracking patent theft operations, including target identification, family manipulation strategies, corporate coordination timelines, and profit distribution among criminal participants. Agent Rodriguez reported, She showed me printed pages from Jake's files containing personal information about my family, financial vulnerabilities, and manipulation tactics specifically designed to pressure me into surrendering my patent rights. He studied our family dynamics for months before launching the graduation confrontation. I realized with disgust, Madison's pregnancy, my parents' financial problems, even my relationship with Professor Williams were all factored into his manipulation strategy. The level of premeditation and systematic planning elevates these charges from simple patent theft to organized racketeering under federal RICO statutes. Prosecutor Chen explained, Jake and his corporate accomplices face potential sentences of 20 to 40 years in federal prison. The recovered evidence also revealed the scope of corruption within academic institutions, with professors at 15 major universities receiving consulting payments in exchange for identifying and betraying promising student innovations. Professor Williams was just one node in a network of corrupt faculty members who were systematically violating their ethical obligations to students for corporate money. Agent Rodriguez continued, the universities involved face massive liability for enabling intellectual property theft through inadequate oversight of faculty consulting arrangements. Most shocking was discovering that Megatech had acquired over $4 billion worth of patents through theft and manipulation over the past 5 years, paying inventors an average of 12% of actual market value, while generating massive profits through licensing agreements and corporate partnerships. Charity Your Renewable Energy algorithms alone have already generated over $30 million in licensing revenue for Megatech during the brief period they illegally controlled competing patent applications. Prosecutor Chen reported, your total patent portfolio could generate over $200 million in legitimate licensing fees over the next decade. The financial scope of the theft attempt was staggering, confirming that my decision to fight rather than accept their fraudulent terms had protected innovations worth generational wealth. What happens to Megatech and Pinnacle Innovation Partners now? Both corporations face criminal charges for operating racketeering enterprises, massive civil liability to victimized inventors, and regulatory sanctions that could effectively end their ability to acquire patents through questionable means. Agent Rodriguez showed me news coverage of the coordinated arrests with financial markets reacting severely to revelations about systematic corporate patent theft. Megatech's stock price had fallen over 30% since morning trading began, while several major clients had suspended business relationships pending investigation outcomes. The corporate conspiracy made a fatal error by targeting your innovations so aggressively, Prosecutor Chen observed. A quieter theft operation might have continued operating indefinitely, but the family pressure campaign and university burglary created evidence trails that exposed their entire criminal network. Late Tuesday afternoon brought the most satisfying development when Jake was arraigned in federal court on charges including racketeering, conspiracy, patent fraud, computer crimes, and organized theft of intellectual property. His attempt to flee the country had been unsuccessful, with federal agents tracking him through financial transactions and ultimately locating him at a hotel near San Francisco International Airport. Jake Morrison attempted to destroy evidence and flee prosecution, but federal investigators recovered his criminal files and communications proving systematic patent theft affecting over 100 young inventors. The federal prosecutor announced during the court hearing. Jake's appearance in orange prison clothing marked a dramatic reversal from his confident corporate persona during the family pressure campaigns. The man who had threatened me with expensive litigation now faced decades in federal prison for orchestrating intellectual property theft operations. Madison attended the hearing as a cooperating witness, providing testimony about Jake's manipulation tactics and criminal coordination with corporate executives. Her pregnancy was clearly visible, adding poignancy to her decision to testify against the husband who had abandoned her to face criminal consequences alone. The defendant exploited family relationships and emotional vulnerabilities to manipulate victims into surrendering valuable intellectual property through fraud and coercion. Madison testified, her voice steady despite obvious emotional distress. Her cooperation with federal prosecution had resulted in reduced charges and delayed sentencing until after the baby was born, though she still faced potential imprisonment for her role in the burglary and theft operations. Wednesday brought news that Megatech's board of directors had terminated all executives involved in the patent theft conspiracy and hired external investigators to review thousands of previous patent acquisitions for evidence of similar criminal activity. Megatech is attempting to distance itself from criminal liability by claiming that rogue executives operated the theft schemes without board knowledge or approval, Agent Rodriguez explained during our update meeting. However, the recovered evidence suggests corporate awareness and approval of questionable patent acquisition practices. The corporate downfall was accelerating as investors, clients, and regulatory agencies reacted to evidence of systematic criminal activity. Pinnacle Innovation Partners had effectively ceased operations, with clients canceling contracts and demanding investigations into previous patent acquisitions that might have involved similar fraud. Charity, the criminal prosecutions are just the beginning of legal consequences for the conspiracy participants, Prosecutor Chen reported. Civil damages, regulatory sanctions, and professional consequences could multiply the punishment for systematic patent theft. As I reviewed the comprehensive evidence of corporate criminal activity, I felt vindicated about the decision to fight rather than accept fraudulent terms for my innovations. The battle had been difficult and emotionally devastating, but it had ultimately exposed and dismantled a criminal network that had been systematically victimizing young inventors for years. The question now was whether the prosecutions and corporate consequences would be severe enough to deter similar schemes and protect future generations of innovators from systematic intellectual property theft. Thursday morning brought an unexpected call from Sarah Chen, my intellectual property attorney, with news that would transform the financial landscape of my patent situation in ways I had never imagined possible. Charity word has spread throughout the tech industry about your innovations and the criminal conspiracy that tried to steal them. We're receiving serious acquisition inquiries from multiple major corporations who want to license or purchase your patents legitimately. The irony was remarkable. Megatech's fraudulent $22 million offer had been exposed as systematic theft, but legitimate corporate interest in my innovations was generating far more valuable opportunities than the criminal conspiracy had ever provided. Sarah, what kind of inquiries are we receiving? Apple, Google, Microsoft, Tesla, and Amazon have all expressed serious interest in licensing agreements for your renewable energy algorithms and mobile security protocols. Additionally, 3 major pharmaceutical companies want to evaluate your artificial intelligence medical diagnostic system. The scope of legitimate corporate interest vindicated my decision to fight the criminal conspiracy rather than accepting their fraudulent terms. My innovations were attracting attention from the most successful and innovative companies in the world. What's the difference between licensing agreements and outright acquisition offers? Licensing allows you to maintain patent ownership while receiving ongoing royalty payments from companies that use your innovations in their products. Acquisition means selling the patents completely for lump sum payments, but losing future earning potential. Over the weekend, Sarah scheduled presentations with representatives from each interested corporation, allowing me to understand their specific applications for my innovations and evaluate the financial terms they were prepared to offer. Monday's meeting with Google's patent acquisition team revealed applications for my renewable energy algorithms in their data center optimization projects, with potential energy savings that could reduce their operational costs by hundreds of millions annually. Ms. Williams, your algorithms could revolutionize renewable energy efficiency across our entire corporate infrastructure. Google's chief technology officer explained during our video conference. We're prepared to offer a 10-year licensing agreement worth $25 million annually plus performance bonuses based on actual energy savings achieved. $25 million per year represented more money than I had ever imagined receiving, but Sarah advised evaluating all options before making any commitments. Tuesday's presentation with Apple focused on my mobile security protocols, which could enhance privacy protection across their iPhone and iPad product lines, serving over 1 billion users worldwide. Your security innovations address critical vulnerabilities that affect hundreds of millions of mobile device users, Apple's security director reported. We're interested in exclusive licensing rights for mobile applications, with terms including $50 million upfront plus $15 million annually for ongoing development and support. The financial terms were staggering, confirming that my innovations possess the exceptional value that had motivated the criminal conspiracy to steal them through fraud and family manipulation. Wednesday brought the most exciting development when Tesla's representatives presented applications for my renewable energy algorithms in their solar panel and energy storage systems, potentially affecting the entire clean energy industry. Ms. Williams, your optimization algorithms could increase solar panel efficiency by 12 to 15% while reducing manufacturing costs. Tesla's engineering director explained. That level of improvement could accelerate renewable energy adoption globally by making clean power more affordable and accessible. Tesla's proposed terms included $40 million upfront for exclusive renewable energy licensing rights, plus royalty payments based on actual sales of improved solar systems and energy storage devices. The social impact potential of your innovations extends far beyond personal financial gain. Tesla's representative continued. Widespread implementation could significantly reduce carbon emissions and accelerate the transition to sustainable energy systems. Thursday's meetings with pharmaceutical companies revealed applications for my artificial intelligence medical diagnostic system that could help doctors identify diseases earlier and more accurately than current technology allowed. Your AI algorithms demonstrate 96% accuracy in early cancer detection compared to 78% for current diagnostic methods, reported the chief medical officer from Johnson & Johnson. Widespread implementation could save thousands of lives annually while reducing healthcare costs through earlier intervention. The medical applications represented the most meaningful potential impact of my innovations with human welfare implications that transcended financial considerations entirely. We're prepared to offer $60 million for exclusive medical licensing rights, plus ongoing royalty payments based on diagnostic system usage across global healthcare networks, Johnson & Johnson continued. Additionally, we'd fund continued research and development to expand the system's diagnostic capabilities. By Friday morning, the competitive bidding had escalated into what Sarah described as an auction war between major corporations seeking exclusive or limited licensing rights to different aspects of my patent portfolio. Charity, the combined value of all offers received this week, exceeds $200 million. Sarah reported with obvious excitement. This represents the most valuable patent licensing opportunity I've encountered in 20 years of intellectual property law. $200 million. I repeated, still struggling to comprehend the financial magnitude. Sarah Megatech's fraudulent offer of $22 million represented barely 10% of the legitimate market value. Exactly. The criminal conspiracy was attempting to steal intellectual property worth potentially $300 million or more in total licensing value over the next decade. The most attractive option involved structuring multiple non-competing licensing agreements that would maximize both financial return and social impact. Tesla would receive exclusive rights for renewable energy applications. Apple would get mobile security protocols, Johnson & Johnson would develop medical diagnostic systems, and Google would optimize data center efficiency. This approach preserves your ongoing patent ownership while generating substantial upfront payments, plus continuing royalty income, Sarah explained. You'd receive approximately $150 million initially plus $15 to $20 million annually in ongoing licensing fees. The financial projections exceeded my most optimistic expectations, confirming that my years of academic sacrifice and innovative research had created genuine value that legitimate corporations were eager to access through fair and legal agreements. Sarah, what about the social impact considerations? I want my innovations to benefit society rather than just generating personal wealth. The licensing agreements can include provisions requiring accessible pricing for medical diagnostics, environmental impact commitments for renewable energy applications, and privacy protection standards for mobile security implementations. Saturday afternoon brought the final corporate presentation from Amazon, which wanted to integrate my innovations across their cloud computing, renewable energy, and logistics optimization systems. Ms. Williams, your combined innovations could revolutionize multiple aspects of our operations while supporting our sustainability commitments and customer privacy protection goals, Amazon's vice president reported. We're prepared to offer $95 million for comprehensive licensing rights across all applications. The Amazon offer represented the simplest financial structure, but potentially limited the social impact by concentrating all applications within a single corporate ecosystem. The decision ultimately depends on your priorities regarding financial maximization versus distributed social impact, Sarah advised. Multiple specialized licenses could generate more total value while ensuring broader implementation across different industries. After reviewing all options with Sarah and consulting independent patent valuation experts, I decided to pursue the multiple licensing approach that would maximize both financial returns and social benefits. The final agreements included Tesla for renewable energy applications at $40 million upfront, plus royalties, Apple for mobile security at $35 million, plus ongoing fees, Johnson & Johnson for medical diagnostics at $60 million plus development funding, and Google for data optimization at $20 million plus performance bonuses. Charity, the combined initial payments total $155 million with projected ongoing royalties of $18 to $25 million annually. Sarah announced as we finalized the agreements. This represents one of the most successful patent licensing arrangements in recent technology industry history. As I signed the final licensing contracts, I reflected on the incredible journey from family betrayal and corporate theft attempts to legitimate recognition and fair compensation for my innovations. The criminal conspiracy had ultimately failed completely, while my decision to fight rather than submit to fraud had protected intellectual property worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The question now was how to use this unexpected wealth responsibly while ensuring that my innovations would benefit society in ways that justified the years of sacrifice required to develop them. Monday morning brought the culmination of months of federal prosecution when Jake Morrison and 3 Megatech executives received their sentences in federal court for operating a criminal conspiracy that had systematically stolen intellectual property from young inventors across the country. I attended the sentencing hearing with Madison, my parents, and dozens of other victims who had come forward after the media coverage exposed the scope of corporate patent theft affecting hundreds of innovators nationwide. Jake Morrison, you orchestrated a sophisticated criminal enterprise that defrauded inventors of intellectual property worth over $4 billion, Federal Judge Patricia Lawson announced during the proceedings. Your systematic exploitation of family relationships and academic vulnerabilities represents a particularly egregious violation of trust and professional responsibility. Jake received a sentence of 22 years in federal prison without possibility of parole plus restitution payments exceeding $30 million to victimized inventors and their families. The severity reflected his role as the primary architect of the criminal conspiracy and his attempt to flee prosecution. The defendant showed no remorse for destroying families and stealing life-changing innovations from young inventors who trusted him with their futures. Judge Lawson continued, "This sentence must send a clear message that intellectual property theft will face serious federal consequences. Megatech executives receive sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years, depending on their levels of involvement in the systematic patent theft operations. The corporation itself faced criminal penalties, including $200 million in fines, asset forfeiture of stolen intellectual property, and ongoing federal monitoring of patent acquisition practices. Megatech Corporation enabled and profited from systematic criminal activity that undermined innovation incentives and destroyed trust in legitimate patent licensing systems, Judge Lawson announced. These penalties reflect the serious corporate responsibility for enabling intellectual property crime. The most emotionally difficult moment came when Madison received her sentence for participating in the burglary and theft operations that had targeted my research. Her cooperation with federal prosecution and obvious remorse had resulted in reduced charges, but criminal consequences remained unavoidable. Madison Williams, your participation in felony burglary and intellectual property theft was inexcusable, regardless of personal circumstances or manipulation, by more sophisticated criminals, Judge Lawson said during Madison's individual hearing. However, your cooperation with federal investigators and genuine remorse justify reduced penalties. Madison received 2 years of federal probation with 6 months of home confinement after the baby was born, plus 500 hours of community service focused on educating young people about intellectual property rights and criminal justice consequences. The court recognizes that you were manipulated by your husband's criminal schemes, but personal circumstances cannot excuse deliberate criminal choices. Judge Lawson continued, your sentence balances accountability with consideration for your pregnancy and cooperation with prosecution. Madison broke down crying as she accepted responsibility for her criminal actions, while expressing gratitude for the opportunity to avoid imprisonment during her baby's early months. Your Honor, I understand that I chose to participate in stealing my sister's life work, and I accept full responsibility for those decisions, Madison stated through tears. I hope to spend the rest of my life making amends for betraying my family and contributing to criminal activity. My parents received sentences of 1 year probation plus restitution payments for their unwitting participation in the conspiracy, with Judge Lawson acknowledging their status as manipulation victims rather than criminal architects. Robert and Linda Williams were clearly exploited by more sophisticated criminals who targeted their financial vulnerabilities and parental instincts, Judge Lawson explained. While their actions enabled criminal activity, their level of culpability differs significantly from the primary conspirators. The comprehensive federal prosecution had effectively dismantled the entire corporate patent theft network while providing justice for hundreds of victimized inventors. Professor Williams and 14 other corrupt faculty members received professional sanctions, including tenure revocation and criminal charges for violating their ethical obligations to students. Tuesday afternoon brought a private family meeting at my parents' house, where we attempted to begin the long process of healing relationships damaged by criminal conspiracy and systematic betrayal. Charity, we know that forgiveness will take time, and we understand if you never fully trust us again, Dad said as we gathered in their living room. But we want to spend whatever time we have left making amends for our participation in trying to steal your innovations. The first step is accepting that criminal behavior has consequences even when it affects family relationships, I replied carefully. Justice required prosecution, but healing requires genuine acknowledgement of harm and commitment to change. Madison, now visibly pregnant and approaching her due date, spoke with obvious difficulty about the shame and regret that would affect the rest of her life. Charity, I know I can never undo the damage I caused by trying to steal your patents and betraying your trust, but I want our children to grow up understanding the importance of intellectual honesty and respecting other people's achievements. Madison, the fact that you testified against Jake and cooperated with federal prosecution demonstrates genuine commitment to justice over personal loyalty. Mom presented a folder containing financial documents showing their commitment to repaying money stolen from my college fund, even though their bankruptcy proceeding would eliminate most other debts. We've arranged to repay the $25,000 taken from your education account, plus interest, even though it will require years of payment plans on our limited retirement income," Mom explained. "It's the least we can do to acknowledge our financial responsibility for enabling criminal activity." "Mom, Dad, I don't want you to impoverish yourselves further trying to repay money that was stolen through manipulation. When my patent licensing income begins, I'll ensure that you can maintain dignity and security in retirement." "Charity, we don't deserve your financial support after everything we did," Dad protested. "You deserve support because you're my parents despite the mistakes you made while being manipulated by professional criminals." Over the next several hours, we established ground rules for rebuilding family relationships based on honesty, accountability, and gradual restoration of trust through consistent actions rather than promises. The baby will grow up knowing the truth about these events and understanding the importance of respecting other people's intellectual property and achievements. Madison committed. "I want my child to admire Aunt Charity's innovations and understand the value of honest work." Wednesday brought news that federal investigators had recovered over $60 million in stolen assets from the criminal conspiracy, with funds being distributed to victimized inventors based on the actual value of patents that had been stolen or acquired through fraudulent means. Charity, your case has become a model for intellectual property crime prosecution and victim restitution. Agent Rodriguez reported during our final official meeting. "The investigation you initiated has protected hundreds of other inventors from similar victimization. The broader impact extended beyond criminal prosecution to include regulatory reforms protecting young inventors from systematic corporate exploitation. Universities were implementing new oversight requirements for faculty consulting arrangements, while patent offices were establishing enhanced verification procedures for competing applications. Your decision to fight rather than accept fraudulent terms has created lasting protection for future generations of innovators." Agent Rodriguez continued. "The legal precedents and regulatory changes will prevent similar criminal conspiracies from operating successfully." Thursday evening brought the most meaningful development when Madison gave birth to a healthy baby girl she named Hope Williams Morrison, with the middle name honoring our family, despite the criminal circumstances that had damaged our relationships. "I chose the name Hope because your fight for justice gave me hope that criminal mistakes don't have to define someone's entire life," Madison explained as I held my new niece in the hospital. Madison Hope represents the possibility that our family can heal and move forward, despite the damage caused by criminal choices. As I looked at baby Hope sleeping peacefully in my arms, I realized that the patent theft conspiracy had ultimately failed to achieve any of its intended goals. My innovations were being developed legitimately by major corporations, criminal participants faced serious legal consequences, and family relationships were slowly healing through accountability and genuine remorse. The baby represented hope for the future, both for our family and for a patent system that would better protect young inventors from the kind of systematic exploitation that had briefly threatened my life's work. Friday brought the final legal resolution when Pinnacle Innovation Partners agreed to a civil settlement requiring them to pay $50 million in damages to victimized inventors while permanently ceasing patent acquisition operations. Charity, the combined criminal prosecution, civil damages, and regulatory reforms represent the most comprehensive response to corporate intellectual property theft in federal law enforcement history. Sarah Chen reported as we finalized the last legal documents. The justice had been thorough and meaningful, but the most important outcome was the protection it provided for future innovators who would benefit from strengthened legal safeguards and increased awareness of corporate exploitation tactics. 2 years later, I stood before a packed auditorium at Stanford University, delivering the keynote address for the newly established Williams Institute for Intellectual Property Protection, funded through my patent licensing revenues and dedicated to preventing the systematic exploitation of young inventors. Innovation requires not just brilliant ideas, but also the courage to protect those ideas from people who would steal them for personal gain. I told the audience of graduate students, faculty members, and technology industry representatives. My experience taught me that the greatest threats to intellectual property often come from those closest to us. The Institute had already helped 37 young inventors protect their patents from corporate fraud attempts, providing legal resources and educational programs that prevented the kind of systematic exploitation I had experienced. Madison Morrison Williams, my sister, serves as a counselor for families affected by intellectual property crime. I announced, gesturing toward the audience where Madison sat with 2-year-old Hope on her lap. Her personal experience with both criminal participation and redemption provides unique insights for families struggling with similar pressures. Madison had completed her probation requirements while establishing a successful career educating families about the warning signs of corporate manipulation and the importance of ethical decision-making when valuable intellectual property was involved. The criminal conspiracy that targeted my patents ultimately failed because I chose to fight rather than submit to fraud. I continued. That choice protected not just my own innovations, but also helped expose a criminal network that had victimized hundreds of other inventors. Baby Hope clapped her small hands enthusiastically during my speech, too young to understand the complex history that had shaped our family, but already demonstrating the energy and curiosity that I hoped would characterize her generation's approach to innovation and intellectual honesty. My parents, now financially secure through the modest trust fund I had established for their retirement, served as volunteer coordinators for the Institute's family education programs, sharing their experience of being manipulated into supporting criminal activity. Robert and Linda Williams represent thousands of family members who've been exploited by corporations seeking to steal intellectual property through emotional manipulation. I explained to the audience. Their willingness to share their story helps other families recognize and resist similar pressure tactics. The renewable energy algorithms that Tesla had licensed from me were now installed in solar systems across 43 countries, providing clean power to over 12 million households, while generating substantial ongoing royalty payments that funded expanded research into sustainable technology. Apple's implementation of my mobile security protocols had protected the personal information of over 800 million users worldwide, preventing data breaches and privacy violations that could have affected billions of dollars in economic activity. Johnson & Johnson's medical diagnostic systems, using my artificial intelligence innovations, had achieved early disease detection rates exceeding 98% accuracy, helping doctors identify cancer, heart disease, and neurological disorders years earlier than previous technology allowed. The social impact of protected innovation extends far beyond personal financial success. I told the audience, when inventors can safely develop and license their work, society benefits from technologies that solve real problems and improve human welfare. The Institute had also established a legal defense fund that provided free attorney services for young inventors facing corporate pressure campaigns similar to the one that had targeted my family. We've successfully defended patent rights worth over $2 billion from theft attempts, while prosecuting 12 criminal conspiracies involving systematic intellectual property fraud, our legal director reported during the event. Google's licensing of my data optimization algorithms had reduced energy consumption at their facilities by 18%, contributing to corporate sustainability goals while demonstrating the environmental benefits of innovation protection. Climate change solutions require not just brilliant innovations, but also legal systems that protect those innovations from corporate theft and manipulation. I explained during the environmental panel discussion. The most satisfying development was learning that federal prosecution of the mega tech conspiracy had deterred similar corporate patent theft operations, with intellectual property crime prosecutions decreasing by 37% over the past 2 years. Criminal consequences work. Agent Rodriguez reported during her presentation about federal law enforcement efforts. When corporations understand that systematic patent theft will result in serious prosecution, they pursue legitimate licensing agreements instead of fraud. Jake Morrison remained in federal prison serving his 22-year sentence, with his conviction serving as a warning to other corporate employees who might consider exploiting family relationships for intellectual property theft. Professor Williams had been permanently barred from academic employment and faced ongoing civil liability for his role in betraying student trust for corporate consulting fees. Academic institutions now maintain strict oversight of faculty consulting arrangements and mandatory disclosure requirements that prevent conflicts of interest, reported the new dean of Stanford's engineering department during the ethics panel. Madison approached the podium during the family panel carrying hope and speaking publicly about her criminal choices and redemption journey. "I participated in stealing my sister's life work because I was jealous of her success and desperate about my financial situation," Madison told the audience with obvious emotion. "Those circumstances don't excuse my criminal behavior, but they explain how corporations exploit family vulnerabilities. My daughter will grow up understanding that innovation requires respect for intellectual property and honest recognition of other people's achievements." She continued, adjusting hope on her hip. "The criminal choices I made could have destroyed her future, but charity's forgiveness and the justice system's fairness gave us both second chances." Hope babbled happily during Madison's presentation, already demonstrating the curiosity and energy that characterize the next generation of potential innovators. "Children like Hope represent the future of American innovation," I said as Madison returned to her seat. "Protecting their intellectual property rights ensures that brilliant ideas will be developed for society's benefit rather than stolen for corporate profit." The event concluded with the announcement of expanded programs, including international partnerships with universities in 12 countries, corporate ethics training for technology industry employees, and legislative advocacy for stronger intellectual property protection laws. The Williams Institute will continue fighting systematic patent theft until young inventors can pursue their innovations without fear of family manipulation or corporate exploitation, I announced during closing remarks. As the audience dispersed, I reflected on the incredible journey from graduation day betrayal to comprehensive criminal prosecution to meaningful social impact through protected innovation. The patents that Jake Morrison had tried to steal were now generating hundreds of millions in licensing revenue while solving real problems for billions of people worldwide. The criminal conspiracy had been completely dismantled, with participants facing serious legal consequences that deterred similar exploitation. Most importantly, the family relationships damaged by criminal betrayal had been slowly rebuilt through accountability, forgiveness, and shared commitment to preventing other families from experiencing similar manipulation. Hope toddled toward me across the auditorium stage, her small arms outstretched and her face bright with the same curiosity that had driven my own innovative research years earlier. "Aunt Charity," she called in her developing vocabulary, reaching for the hug that represented hope for the future. As I lifted Hope into my arms, I realized that the criminal conspiracy's ultimate failure had created something far more valuable than financial success. It had established legal precedents, protecting intellectual property, educational programs, preventing exploitation, and family relationships strengthened through accountability and redemption. The innovations that corporations had tried to steal were now benefiting society through legitimate development, while the legal victory had protected hundreds of other inventors from similar victimization. Hope, when you grow up, I want you to remember that innovation requires both brilliant ideas and the courage to protect those ideas from people who would steal them, I whispered to my niece as she nestled against my shoulder. The future belonged to innovators like Hope, who would grow up in a world where intellectual property rights were protected, and young inventors could pursue their dreams without fear of systematic exploitation by corporate predators or family manipulation. Standing there holding my niece while surrounded by the educational programs and legal protections that had emerged from my fight for justice, I understood that the true victory wasn't the hundreds of millions in licensing revenue or even the criminal prosecution of the conspirators. The real triumph was the protection of innovation itself, ensuring that future generations of inventors could develop technologies that would solve humanity's greatest challenges without fear that their life's work would be stolen through fraud manipulation or corporate conspiracy. Have you ever faced a situation where family members pressured you to make decisions that weren't in your best interests? How did you handle the conflict between family loyalty and protecting your own future? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story inspired you to think about protecting innovation and intellectual property rights, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more stories about standing up for justice, even when it means fighting against people you love. Share this story with anyone who might be facing family pressure to make unfavorable financial decisions. And remember that sometimes protecting your future means having the courage to say no to people who claim to have your best interests at heart. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to justice to reconciliation. I hope Hope's generation will inherit a world where innovation is protected and young inventors can pursue their dreams without fear of exploitation. Until next time, keep fighting for what's right, even when the fight is harder than you ever imagined.